To order. 6:02, I'm going to call the meeting to order. We'll dispense with the roll call, just to take note that everyone is here except for Commissioner Gross. And we'll go to item number 3, the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, confer with the Board of Select Persons regarding the resolution that we've all received. We do have the first Select Woman, Brenda Kupchik, and Select Person Tom Flynn here in person, and I just want to confirm that Select Person Lefkowitz was able to dial in. I see her on the screen. Her name.
I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I want to briefly just check in with Council Steve Mednick at this point to kind of go over a few things. If you could kind of set the stage as to how this conferral meeting should operate. And then we do have a few procedural questions I'd like to clarify for everyone's edification at the outset after that.
So tonight's meeting is the conferral session. You have before you this evening a resolution of the Board of Select Persons. There are some 22 specific items and a couple of broad items dealing with errata corrections and recovery recovery provisions. And the objective tonight is to go through them. Well, you have the members of the Board of Select Persons in front of you. Item by item doesn't mean there has to be detail. You're not, the select people don't have to talk on each item, but as we go through the items, it would be useful to know why those items, if it's not apparent, are on the list, and to try to get as much information as you can so the commission can make an informed decision. Once you do that, you will then have an opportunity to go through the document and complete your final report based on what you hear and what you're listening and what information you call from the members of the Board of Select Persons this evening. And then you send the report back to them, and then they can vote up or down, in whole or in part, on your final report. And they would, if they approve some form of the report, if not all of the report, they would also have to approve question or questions for the ballot and submit them to the Secretary of the State's office the first week in September. So that's where we are in the process right now.
Okay, so just to clarify then, so after this process, we deliberate and make decisions on what to do on these 22 or 24 items in the resolution, and then is it submitted back to them in a list of revisions, or is it an entirely new document that we submit back to them?
What I tend to do, what I tend to recommend is that we send back to them a revised redline version of the charter that addresses each of the items that are in there. In fact, in the current version of the charter, you'll see what I'm talking about. You have a handy little balloon reference to each of the recommendations that are coming before you. That document will go back with red lines to show them what you've done in each of those sections, if anything. If they've asked you to eliminate a provision and you don't, then you send it back to them indicating that that has not been touched. We believe that that should be there, and then they have a decision to make whether they keep it or eliminate it. Something important to understand is that everybody needs to be careful at this stage because they have full ability to eliminate a provision that's a new provision. And hopefully that new provision doesn't impact other areas of the charter. And that's what we have to be very careful about when we go to this phase with the final decisions. And that's why the conferral phase is important, because you want to maintain contact between the appointing authority and the council and the commission to make sure that you come back with a package that will be acceptable and that will work with the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, and I think that kind of got to the next question that a few of us had, is what happens when we send it back and they don't have to agree with the entire document, all or nothing. It's, they can step by step say, you know, kind of veto certain provisions of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
In whole or part. Well, let's say they don't like the definition that we have of, well, it's a good example. Let's say they don't like the notice definitions for whatever reasons, and they eliminate those notice definitions. That's going to have an interesting springing effect of having to repopulate the document with the various notice provisions that we eliminated throughout the document, boards and commissions, RTM, et cetera. We will have to repopulate the document to reflect the elimination of those definitions. Those definitions were designed to provide a place where everybody could go and see what notice means, how you do notice, and allows the bodies to develop notice standards, both in compliance with the law of the state as well as the charter. If we eliminate that, then we have to resurrect the current provisions. That's an extreme example. I'm hoping that does not happen. You know, a more narrow example would be, let me look. You know, a more narrow example would be the issue of the size of the RTM, for that matter. If you came in with one number and they didn't like that number, at this point, it would simply resurrect the current number in the charter. They would not have the ability to modify the number. So if you come in with 30 and they reject 30, it reverts to the current language. If you did 40 and they reject 40, it would revert to the current language. There's no choice. I did a little research on that issue today, and we really do have to come down with one locked-in number. But I wanted to give you that example. That's a pretty simple example of how it would work.
And I think that's helpful, and I asked these questions intentionally for everyone's benefit, both here and at home, so we're all on the same page going into this, so we understand what we're about to do. So I would ask if any other commissioners have questions that they'd like to clarify in terms of the procedure only at this point. John?
I do, John Wynn. Question relates to, in addition to modifications to the charter language, there was discussion in prior meetings about issues about pros and cons or topics that were considered during our deliberations and discussions. Would we submit back a summary of thoughts on and responsive to whatever those questions might have been?
We could do a transmittal letter. Normally, the detailed transmittal letter is the one we did back in early June, which was on our draft document. If there are things you want to explain, why you reached a conclusion, we could prepare a transmittal letter to go back to the Board of Select Persons that explains each and every item, if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so at this point, I think, I'll defer to the first select person, woman. Would it be helpful for you to guide us through the resolution, or do we've had the opportunity, obviously, to read this. We could also take it a different tact and kind of just go through and ask questions, but it might be helpful to get an overview if you think that makes sense, or I kind of defer to you as to how you might want to approach this.
So I think that obviously our meetings were public. I believe most of the members attended them either in person or virtually. So I think you're pretty familiar with what was sent back and sort of the reasoning behind it, and obviously the attorneys or select people who had those interests. I just wanted to sort of just give an overview, if that's all right with you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously, I just wanted to start off by saying when I was elected again in November of 2019, and at my State of the Town address in, I believe, November 25th, or no, that was my inauguration. I think it was January of 2020. I said that I wanted to do a number of things for our community. Clean up the public corruption scandal, deal with a whole host of issues, modernize our town government, and I wanted to do a charter revision, because the last one was done in 2006. And what I realized the other day when I was having a conversation with Attorney Baldwin was that in 2006, the first selectman then, Ken Flato, was very specific about what items he wanted reviewed. And I believe the Board of Selectmen, and I don't remember even being at that meeting, but I remember at the time, they sent specific things to that charter commission. It was the term of the selectmen, it was the Board of Ed terms, and maybe some other small items. And maybe naively, I didn't do that. So I sent the whole charter, and I said, look at the whole charter, go at it. And that's a big thing. It's a lot of work, and it's a big document. So I can understand that it was a lot of work for your commission to really review all of this. And frankly, I would just like to applaud you for your hard work in reorganizing the document, which as a layperson, I always found hard to read and hard to understand. And I think the only layperson who understands it really well is Commissioner Iacono, because she basically reads it every day and has for maybe the last 10 or 15 years. Everybody has their thing. So, but it was hard to, maneuver, and it was all disjointed. So I thought that work that you did was really good. So obviously, COVID hit 4 months into office. This wasn't a priority for me anymore. Taking care of our town was my priority. So, it came up, and I said, okay, obviously, let's just talk about it. We had a number of people who were arrested. We had contamination issues to handle. So this was low on the priority list. But I still didn't want to back away from it because I felt our town was owed this. This document was antiquated. It needed an update. And I appreciate the commissioners who stepped up to do this work. So what I want to say now is, I want to thank the people who actually provided helpful input, who gave real information that they thought could be helpful to making our town governing document a better document. One of those people are in this room right now, Judy Ewing, who really did provide. And Judy's been around a really long time, and she's been really involved in government. So she provided some really, I think, input that you took consideration of, and you did your best to, and a few others. Kathleen Griffin, I know, I read a lot of her emails. She had some very helpful information. And some residents did take the time, not many, but took the time to watch the meetings or dig in and read, and not just go off rumor and innuendo, but to provide real feedback. And our department heads, and I know that our director of the library sent in some good information to be helpful, and some of our other department heads who live under this, as well as our town attorney, who basically uses this as the governing document of our town when he is advising myself, the Board of Finance, the RTM, all of our department heads, any board and commission will typically ask the town attorney, is this okay? Are we in the guidelines of the charter? Are we doing the right thing? So, it's obviously a document we use quite often. I do, however, want to bring up what someone just sent to me about half an hour ago. And I'm going to pass it out. I printed them in my office before I came down. Could you just pass them? So this process, to a certain extent, unfortunately, has become highly politicized. And someone just sent this to me, like I said, about a half hour ago. This is what the Fairfield Democratic Town Committee posted on their page, their Facebook page. Now, it says, please show up and be heard during public comment tomorrow. No mention about this meeting tonight, where the actual transmittal of information of the resolutions from the Board of Selectmen are actually going to be seriously discussed and by this commission. No mention of that. And deeply concerning changes. Slashing the maximum size of the RTM, concentrating the power of the first select person. At no time during this entire process, which is now almost going on a year, and anywhere in the document that you have before you, does the executive branch get any additional power? None. Increasing the executive branch's control over the public school system operations. That's not in here either, or I at least didn't see it. Proposing purchasing contract language that will exacerbate bottlenecks for Fairfield Public School System operations. Giving the first select person the power to unilaterally mediate and resolve conflicts between various town boards, which is something we actually discussed during our transmittal, and I believe we're going to be taking it out at some point because I have that power already. I can call any person on any board or commission or elected official and say, hey, can I help you with something? Can I help resolve a conflict? They can tell me, you know, where to get off, but I could at least offer that as the leader of the town. Failing to clearly define responsibilities for charter mandated town positions, and, you know, dumbing down the qualifications of the head of the Public Works Director. You know, I've heard that comment numerous times, and frankly, I find it really demeaning and insulting. A project manager, someone who manages large groups of people, is not a dumbing down position. And frankly, it's not helpful. And this thing goes on and on. This is our governing document. This is important. This is really important. And the politicization of this situation has corrupted this process. It's not appropriate. We can have disagreements about specific items that are really in the changes, the real items. We can have real debate like civic-minded individuals about real items that are in this charter. But it's very difficult to have a discussion or even respond to false narratives, to spin, to propaganda. That's not helpful for the commission. It's not helpful for the Board of Selectmen who has to vote on this. And it is most certainly not helpful to the public, to the people of this town who will be going to the polls to vote on it. So I am sincerely asking for everyone to please have some just civility in this process and actually talk about the facts and have a discussion about what you think should be in our charter and what you don't think for your own personal opinion. I don't think I just don't think it's helpful. And again, there's been a discussion about not enough time, stop the process. The Charter Commission did work. There's a lot of good work here, a lot. This charter is way better than it was when you guys started. It's just way better. Now, there may be parts in it that people disagree on. That's fine. We're all individuals. We're all people with different opinions. That's okay. Have a different opinion. But telling someone that their opinion is wrong or dumb or, you know, corrupt or what is just not good civil discourse. So I, as the leader of this town, I am calling on this community to stop with the propaganda and the spin and have real dialogue about what's in this, give real feedback about real items, and let's try to make the town charter that governs our community's elected officials and how they behave and how they operate, make it into the best document it can be. And that's all I'm going to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, may I
Thank
jump
you.
in because it feels, this is Selectwoman Lefkowitz.
Yes,
It just feels.
but before
it
that,
just feels-
before that for 1 second, I would like to respond. I would like to thank the first selectman woman for her comments. I echo them. I quite frankly have felt the same. And, I want to be proud of the work that we're doing here and the barrage of these types of emails and comments really is grating and wears on you after months of it, quite frankly. And if there are true policy discussions to be had, I couldn't agree more. I love civil discourse on policy, but not on false narratives. So I thank you. I really appreciate that. And yes, Selectwoman Lefkowitz, please go ahead.
It just feels like it just feels like, to me, this is a meeting that's supposed to be really focused on the policy. So having that conversation, it just feels like it's perpetuating this narrative of a one-sided narrative, because objecting to specific things in the charter, which is what it sounds like that post that the first Selectwoman was referencing, is an opportunity to advocate for points of view and policy related to the charter itself and changes to it. So, to point out that it's a democratic position is really, to me, again, is just perpetuating something that we're trying to not get involved in tonight. And so that to me is defeating what, and then having you jump in and say, you applaud that when really we're just trying. I think the community response is really about advocating for what people feel they want changed. And I don't see how that's partisan. I don't see how that's, quote, dirty word politics. That's people asking questions and interrogating a process. So I would respectfully, disagree with the way it's being characterized. I have been frustrated on the politics side of this. I do believe that this commission has been acting with intentionality and with the focus on the work and not being political, but I would say that the politics is not, we haven't addressed the politics because some of the procedural issues have been where the political has become into play. So I too would like to focus on the policy. So to me, that set off the meeting in kind of a strange way. So because I was really here to talk about the issues and the items to be addressed, and I thought it was the CRC meeting, not an opportunity to talk about the politics.
Okay, well, thank you for your comments. And I think, yes, Selectman Flynn.
Yeah, might as well. First of all, to the first Selectwoman, and thank you for bringing this to our attention. I did not see this today. I would agree with some of what Nancy said, except for the fact that it was put up on a political website or Facebook page, which by definition kind of makes it a political statement as opposed to just a policy statement. If it hadn't been there but was circulated independently, I probably would understand her point. More importantly, though, I want to add my thank you to this group. You guys have been through the ringer over the last number of months. And one of the things that's interesting about that is, excuse me, I'm just getting some crosstalk here. Yeah, no problem. It's just, one of the things is that you guys had to do all your work in public, and it's kind of messy to watch the sausage be made as the whole thing goes. So disagreement, debate, fights even, right, are part of that process, and it probably comes up with a better document because all that happens. And I certainly appreciate, when someone as experienced as Judy opines, who I think, Judy, didn't you serve in on previous charter revision commissions and things too? So certainly we should learn from that, and I think you guys all did. So I think I wouldn't take some of the commentary that you got to heart personally. I also certainly, as I was part of the feedback that you're getting tonight that we're going to discuss, I certainly wouldn't take any disagreements or any request for additional information personally or as an indictment of what was recommended, right? I, too, and I've said this to Brenda and to Nancy and to Jim, even though maybe all the changes to the charter don't go through, I think you've provided a valuable service to the community with a lot of what you've done. So I would stand behind the things that move forward, and I'd be proud of your work and effort. And I would take that into consideration. And I think, Pam, I think I also had that same conversation with you. So that's all I'd like to say. And I too would like to focus on the issues and not get into any politics on that, on either side of the aisle. I think the document's too important for that. So, thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Chairman Caffarelli,
Yes,
may I add a comment?
certainly.
I do want to echo, because I appreciate the hard work that's been done by this commission and the integrity. Again, I want to echo that, the integrity with which I think you've all worked and the decorum, that you've exhibited while holding these meetings. I think for me, what particularly stings is the commentary tonight, which alludes to a post, echoes, when I hear rumors that I have been spoke about in a negative way in a public setting, in a public meeting, because of the inquiry and the questioning, I think Mr. Flynn said it exactly. I think it's my responsibility to be asking questions and to be challenging and to as Mr. Wynn once said, there are no sacred cows. And so to be called names and to be, and at least that's what I was hearing from people on all sides of the aisle, because I was asking informed questions. I think that's why I enter this meeting with some frustration. And so when it was started in that way, it stings a bit, because I really would like to put all of that aside and focus on your work. And unfortunately, we're not able to do that if the first thing out of the gate is the discussion of the politics. So that's where and I will put it aside for tonight, because I think the work is too important. And I don't want it to diminish what you're trying to accomplish here in the next, now 15 days. So thank you.
Well, I thank you for your comments. If you were called any names in this forum, I won't stand for it. If I overlooked it during any of our meetings, I apologize for that, but I certainly don't recall anybody ever using any disparaging remarks to any individuals. In fact, there was one occasion during a public comment where I felt that was happening and I stopped that person. That was the only time I can recall, but outside of this room, I have no control. None of us are elected officials, so we, quote unquote, didn't sign up for the public ridicule. We came here to do a job, and I think that that's kind of what resonated with some of the comments that I heard at the outset of this meeting, is that it's exhausting, quite frankly, to hear these comments for months on end, and some of them do become personal. And so maybe this was a time to refocus and say, let's put all that stuff aside, because it's continuing to come in. So we're saying, let's just call a truce on all sides and focus on the policy, because we've got 2 days to do this, right? Today and tomorrow and Monday if we need it. But I do think in earnest that we have the time and the fortitude to get this done in 2 days, and we can focus on it now. And I do thank, again, the Board of Selectmen for being here and taking your time to explain this to us or answer any questions that we have. I recognize most of us were at all these meetings that the board had and have read the resolution. So I think we can get to that now if there's no other comments from the select persons. All right, so I think the way to do this then is just to go through resolution by, the number 1 to 24, and see if there are any comments the select persons would like to make, or if the commissioners have any questions on them. For the public's benefit, I will read the recommendation of each number. And the first one is in Article 1, Section 1.4, review definitions, including but not limited to the definitions of, quote, board and commission, quote, contract, ordinance, and regulation, adding a definition for vacancy and appointing authority, as well as general review of the definitions necessary to ensure clarity and consistency. Are there any comments from the Board of Selectmen on this? Selectwoman Lefkowitz, did you want to, maybe, does the commission have any questions?
I would say that, as the first selectwoman said, you know, we did talk about all of this. I'm happy to answer questions if there are still outstanding confusions or questions about it. But really, I do think that I was able to advocate for the various items during the course of the Board of Selectmen conversations. There may be a few areas when I might want to chime in, but mostly
Okay.
I would say if anyone has questions.
All right, Commissioner Mottola?
Do I have to turn this on? Yes. Yeah, just this. Push the button too?
Don't have to hold it.
Oh, it's not like the Board of Ed, okay. I better make sure I shut it off when I'm done talking. So a couple of, on the question, on the definition of contract, I know we had annotated notes from, I think Steve Mednick did this, and he said there are no issue with the definitions of board and commission or contract. So the question I have with respect to the definition of contracts is the inclusion of, where it says including the Board of Education. And I'm asking that question because I know later on in this document, I think it's at Article 4, Section 4.2B1, there's going to be, I think, a recommendation to eliminate the Board of Education from that particular language. So my question is, why, and I'm saying this because, let's all be honest with each other, we're getting a lot of, for lack of a better term, concern, agita, whatever you want to call it, with respect to including the Board of Education under this definition. And I don't see anywhere in this document, this charter document, where, assuming we'll get rid of that language that I just referenced, where Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, RTM, or the RTM would have some control, obviously, over collective bargaining agreements that they would have to ratify that come from the Board of Education. But I don't see how the Board of Education comes in play with respect to contracts in this charter. Now, there is current language in our current charter that the Board of Education is subject to the purchasing provisions, authority, so on and so forth, of the town, and they are involved in that process, and that, you know, that's probably a good thing because we want to make sure that, you know, when the Board of Ed is bidding out for projects that they're following rules, so on and so forth, that go along with bidding process. So, but I don't understand why this language would be in this definition, because I don't see anywhere in this document where any town body would have authority over a Board of Education contract. So I don't know if Mr. Mednick or Jim wants to comment on that. And I'm ready to listen on it.
Steve?
Steve, you want to take that, or do you want me?
I'll be happy to take a first stab at it. Whether the language is there or not, the reality is, under law, with the exception of those things that are specifically granted to the Board of Education, these are city contracts. And particularly when you get into the capital side or multi-year side, with the exception of collective bargaining agreements, agreements for the hiring of a superintendent, it is possible that, and likely, that on a multi-year lease, a multi-year agreement of some sort, that they would have to come to the RTM for approval as a legislative body, because the Board of Ed has no authority to enter into multi-year agreements committing the money of the town of Fairfield to that agreement. So whether the parenthetical is in there or not, in the same way that procurement procedures and other procedures have to be followed by the Board of Education, they are covered. So from my perspective, I'm agnostic as to whether or not you have the parenthetical in there or not. I think as a matter of law, boards of education have very specific rights, and those rights should be respected. But they are not excluded from the normal oversight and regulation of a municipality. We can't make decisions on how they spend their money. Those things are very, very carefully protected. But I usually put provisions like this in charters just to make sure that everybody understands that's the case. Whether the parenthetical is there or not, it makes no difference to me because I think the law is clear.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You said something like the Board of Ed would have no authority to enter into a long-term contract where they lease out their space. That's obviously something that they have no authority to do. I think we have to allow the.
It's not their space, it's owned by the town.
And I agree with that. They would have no authority to do something like that. So, listen, I understand what you're saying, and I think the term here is unnecessary, and I think it's, and it goes to, the earlier discussion here. Whether we like it or not, I think it's leading to some, for lack of a better term, distrust about the process. That's all I'm saying. Obviously, the law governs here, so if you have it in here or don't have it in here, whatever the law of the state of Connecticut with respect to the authority of a Board of Education or what authority a town has over the Board of Education would apply. I'm just saying, I don't think the language here is necessary. And I think it's causing more concern as opposed to being beneficial. That's all I would say.
Yeah. From a legal perspective, I don't disagree with that, Commissioner.
May?
Sure, please.
Jim Baldwin, I just agree that it's superfluous, it's not necessary, and if it can lead to other interpretations that are unintended, then I see no reason why it should remain, and it's perfectly okay to take it out.
And I appreciate that. I mean, I think, I'll say one more thing to move on. One of the things we kind of want to try to do here, hopefully, is like get this thing passed by the town. And if you have something like that in here, it's just, we've seen the emails and we've seen it. So that's why I think we should take it out.
Sounds good. I agree.
I'm one for one.
Yeah. I'm not sure we're deliberating at this point.
Fine. I'm not going to jump in on a bunch of lawyers.
Yeah. So,
You can retire now, John.
yeah. I don't,
Can I leave and go watch the Met game? And
we can note it for the record, 6:41. We've got to, we're back on agreement. This is what it used to feel like. Thank you, John. So,
Can I ask a question?
Please, go
Just
ahead.
That simple parenthetical deletion eliminates all the contagion that's been going on around this topic?
I think if you get rid of that, and then later on, when we get to section, what is it, section 4.2B1A, I think there's a recommendation to eliminate that language. I think that's going to go a long way.
Eliminating those 6 words and 4 parens is, okay? So we just picked up a lot of support for the work that we're doing then, I guess.
That's right.
Okay, good. That's good news.
no, I know.
We need a point of, we didn't agree on anything right now. Maybe we could.
Yeah.
We're not debating. So my understanding is we're going through each item,
Right.
seeing if there's any back, and because I have comments on this too, although not any real different from anybody else's. So I suggest we keep going through one by one and getting any information we, the BOS or we have for Sutton. And then after that, come back.
And vote.
If that- Yeah,
Yeah.
we should go one by one, and I do think we should vote, yeah. I agree with that.
Thank you.
Not until we've asked all the questions, though,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Yeah,
fine. Later on,
okay.
I'll ask the question.
Good, good, and thank you
So
for
can I
that.
ask a point of clarity, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman?
Yeah, please.
And I think Commissioner Brogan may have just asked or clarified it for me. But so the point tonight is to go through those articles with the Board of Selectmen in case you have questions. You then have the opportunity to go back and debate, have conversations around them, come to consensus or not. And then tomorrow night, will the comments, the public comment, be allowed to be focused on these, or is it more broad? So is tonight an opportunity to be voting on them and what you'll send back, or is this really just a clarifying meeting?
So it's a conferral meeting, however long that takes.
Conferral meeting, okay.
Yeah, and if we have time, I think that the deliberation should start. And so if we could come to some
Okay.
agreements. And as for the public comment tomorrow, in my eyes, I would hear from the commission, but it would be limited to the items in the resolution because that's all that's before us.
Okay, my point being that if people do come to comment tomorrow night, it would be on the conferral and the conversation tonight and based on the resolution, et cetera. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, it would be, be correct, but I do think overall it's just on the items that are in the resolution that we're considering, so.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Does anyone have anything to add in terms of that response on the public comment tomorrow? Okay, so number 2. Elected town officials, please consider including the RTM within the definition as an elected town official and making modifications to the charter accordingly. I think what I'll do is I'll just, does the Board of Selectmen have any comments that they'd like to offer in addition to what has been already said on this number? Anything from the commission? Pam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the Board of Selectmen, can somebody tell me the rationale and the thought process of why that they would like this to happen? I'll say we very, very loud and clearly heard from the public about how the RTM is special, the RTM is different, the RTM is its own entity, the RTM is the legislative body that's set up by districts. The RTM is not subject to the minority representation provision. Therefore, it's its own standalone thing. They can self-regulate themselves. So I'm just confused after all the overwhelming public comment that we got on this, that we were being asked to combine them under a definition and not keep separated out the elected town official and the RTM. In addition, if you go in and look at Greenwich's charter and you look at Darienne's charter, which we keep getting compared to, it's separate. So I would just sort of like to understand where this request is coming from.
Does Selectwoman Lefkowitz, I think I heard you speaking.
Yeah, I think it was, it wasn't necessarily to combine. I think when I was doing that forensic evaluation with Attorney Baldwin, there were some based on errata, based on however it happened, there were some rights that were left out. And I think the idea, I don't necessarily have a dog in the fight either way in terms of making it elected official, but I think it was inconsistent based on some of the mistakes that we found where it was excluded in places it shouldn't have been. And so I think in the course of that conversation, it was making sure that it was, one versus the other, that all the rights were there, that it was included the way it should be, that so it's not necessarily that it has to be combined, but it has to be consistent, and that the rights that are afforded to the RTM were not excluded.
Okay, so specification of roles then, not necessarily combining those two, because the public was very, very clear. Thank you.
So I guess I'm confused then. If I could ask you a follow-up question. Are there specific examples of how this would benefit or how the RTM has less rights when they're not defined as an elected town official?
I think it was based, and I'd have to go back again to my notes. It was when we were going through and when changes were made and things were moved around. There were times where it was excluded, where the RTM was excluded. There were small, and again, I don't have it right in front of me. So it just became a question of, and there were a few mentions. It just needs to be clear that the RTM has the same rights as elected officials. Not that it's fine that it's carved out. It doesn't have to be combined. But for example, and this is just one thing that I can think of, is the right to be able to ask for a written legal opinion. That was left off in one of the early drafts. The fact that, and again, it was small things that when you looked back, and here I can pull out my initial document, that the moderator was from its members. I mean, there were just small things throughout that we kept referring Attorney Baldwin, you'll remember, as the RTM issue. So, again, I could call them out, but the written legal opinion was the...
Maybe it might be helpful if,
clear that I can remember.
sorry to interrupt, maybe if you don't mind, maybe Attorney Baldwin could clarify or add something.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Nancy, I think you'll recall that the net of it was that there are so many places in the document where the reference to town officials and town officers and their responsibilities and authority to do certain things always had the and members of the RTM. And the question was asked as to why are they separated like that and not just become town officials like everyone else. And the answer to that question is based on the historical nature of the RTM and others that I think you're familiar with. And so the question is one of style and one of kind of historical reference and distinction, but not one of substance, because we've made sure that in every such instance where the RTM was included or made part of whatever particular section it was and substantive statement being made in the charter with respect to powers and duties and responsibilities, those all remain. So those are captured, but what's not happened is the combination and the deletion of the reference to the RTM members and just putting them in the general category of town officials. I think that's the issue that's before us right now. Does that refresh your recollection?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And I think it was, there were some places where, quote, and RTM were left out. And I think based on that, we decided it was best that we put this up as something that needed to be examined and explored. But I do think you've characterized it. And I'm looking back at the notes from when we met.
Okay, I think that's
Can I just-
helpful.
One thing, so when you guys did your forensic review, are you comfortable that any problem has been corrected?
Yes.
Nancy, are you comfortable with that too?
I mean, the only way I would be able to say that for sure is if we went back and kind of did it again. But in terms of trusting the process, that's the choice we have, so.
And if I may, I think Steve would agree that with that said, that would be considered errata if by chance something was missed. It certainly is not intentional. I don't believe that's the case. It was the case, as Nancy pointed out, several weeks ago. But the latest versions, I believe that we're all up to speed on that. But if that does not happen to be the case, the correction should be made as an errata.
So on this subject, and I'm going to digress for 2 seconds, but it's part of it. So for the public's benefit, can you, and maybe Steve, Nancy, and Jim certainly, my understanding of what happened was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that where there was, and I'm saying this with all due respect, so don't jump down my throat, where there was a representation that there had been no changes to our current charter, but sections were moved around for organizational purposes, that there was some concerns that where those representations were made, that there were in fact some changes that I certainly didn't pick up on, because when I'm told that we didn't delve into a certain section of the charter and no changes were made, I relied on that. And so it was my understanding that where there was some concern that maybe because of, sections being moved here and there, that there were some changes that there literally, you, Attorney Baldwin, Mednick, Nancy, a couple other people actually spent several hours going through the document and correcting and fixing where that may have happened. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, and that's those instances that you're referring to were unintentional. So it was in the drafting process. Steve, you can elaborate if you feel like you need to, but it was unintentional. It was just in the drafting process, and that's why we have the vetting that we do and have so many eyes on it. That's a good thing. It's a very lengthy document.
Okay.
That should take place.
All right, I think that's important, but Nancy, I don't know if you want to say anything about it.
Yeah, thank you, John. I appreciate that. I also just want to be clear, because as I'm looking back into my notes, I think the initial concern was if it was going to be combined, or if it wasn't going to be combined, that the RTM was going to be considered a town official. There were places, and this is just the part I want to clarify, that, and it was in a few places where, quote, and I said this earlier, quote, and RTM, end quote, were left out. So that led to the concern and the consistency. So for me, it's not a matter, to go back to Commissioner Iacono's original question about combining. It's not necessarily that would be my desire or request, given the public outcry that it is separate, but rather that we are sure that is navigated and corrected, whether it was errata or otherwise, so that and RTM is included where appropriate, so that it's not losing the powers that it has. That's all.
When we reviewed this and we voted on it, one of the things that came up through the discussion with the attorneys was it was a distinction without a difference. And that it was a vestige of it being a very old document and the RTM being a very specific carve out in that as separate from, let's say the Board of Selectmen or what have you, but they had all the rights and powers, and important to me was that they are covered by the same insurance policies and everything else that town officials would be covered by, with the same expectation of being covered by, things such as your code of conduct and the like. And we were assured by the attorneys that was the case. And we requested that you just go back and make sure one more time that indeed that was the case. And if so, I didn't have a strong opinion either way, whether you included them as town officials or RTM, because as I said, it's a distinction without a difference.
Thank you for the clarification.
Anything further on this item? All right, so moving on to number 3, Article 1, and generally, please review the rules of order and civility, open meetings, public records, and the diversity, equity, inclusion, And further, in the discussions of open meetings, please consider removing the open meeting requirement from Article 3.4B. In the alternative, establish a public meeting standard that establishes a context under FOIA, including the necessity from time to time of executive sessions. Questions on this one? From the commission, John Matola.
So I guess my first question on the rules of order and civility, was that a concern for the entire Board of Selectmen, or was it just maybe one or two of you, or can someone answer that? And what was the concern again?
I think that was, Nancy brought that up.
I had, and we have heard from some residents who've expressed their concern. As I believe Attorney Mendick has supported, to me, having this in the charter where it may, to me, it just doesn't necessarily belong here. It can be inclusive to a point of being, or being, it's almost like it can't go far enough. And I think that it just, it's problematic to me, as I said, and where it could possibly be used, where an ordinance might do. We do conduct meetings through Robert's rules. I would be concerned about people's ability to ask probing and challenging questions. I just don't know that it belongs here, and in doing some research on other charters and what they include, there was a lot of support to not have it in a charter. I think the open meeting discussion was as it related to making sure that the RTM had the ability to also have executive session. I want to make sure that, is that what this article is? Sorry, I'm just also going back to my notes now. I just want to say, I'm sorry, for the record, I'm very low energy. My uncle died last night, and so I'm very low energy, so I apologize. So if I'm misconstruing what this number 3 is, please let me know. But I think it was those two issues. And then the diversity, equity, and inclusion clause. And I believe Attorney Mednick had shared something with this commission to consider. So those were the 3 comments I had and would hope that the commission would look at this again.
Okay, and Selectwoman Lefkowitz did share that with me earlier, and I'm very sorry for your loss. I didn't know if I could say it publicly,
Yeah.
so I didn't want to lead with that, but I do, I
Thank you.
think on behalf of all of us, I think that we're very sorry for what you're going through.
Thank you. I just hear it. I'm so low energy, so I apologize.
John?
So I don't know if that answers the question, Commissioner Mottola, but.
No, I appreciate that. So on the rules of order and civility, and we voted it as a commission, I like obviously the concept, but and I think I said this before, I understand this is really something new in a charter. I think Attorney Mednick said that, and I do question whether some of the things in here would be enforceable. But, and the only thing I would throw out with, because again, I think it's a good idea to have this concept. I don't know if it might be more appropriate to have an RTM study this issue and enact something like this through the ordinance process. That's the only thing I would throw out, because I don't think we really studied it for too long.
Commissioner Mottola, I don't know if his mic is not on.
Is his mic on?
Yeah, it's on. It was on.
A low talker, John.
I've never been accused of being a low talker. So, so what I was saying is, I like the concept. I have concerns about its enforceability. I have certain concerns about, did we really have the time to to look at this and review it. And I guess all I'm throwing out there is this something that's better to be studied over a longer period of time by our legislative body and then incorporate this through an ordinance process and procedure? That's all I'm saying. And I don't know if anyone wants to comment on it, but I don't want to belabor this. So that's my thoughts.
So,
Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
oh, no, please, I just wanted to just clarify that, so it sounded like you were getting into a bit of a deliberation and debate, so there's, no, and I'm not saying that, but I was hoping there was a question at the end, but we want to just try and maybe get through these questions that, for the select person, so. Yeah, no, yeah, so it sounded like there was a question, and we have an answer, so that's a good thing.
That was a question.
So this,
I think that Commissioner Mottola sort of, for me, put it into a statement, but I would agree as by way of response that's how I would answer.
And I think Selectman Flynn.
yeah. So this is really 3 or 4 different things tied up in one notion to make it easier, because it's all related to one specific article. As I recall the discussion, it was certainly about whether this civility belonged in the charter or not. Worthy of debate, I came down on the fact that I actually thought it was a really good provision, and I thought the importance of it and having it in the charter, particularly in the times with which we live, both nationally as well as locally sometimes, as this committee's gone through. I think it was really important to set our expectation that it was here. I think, to Mr. Mottola's point, you could also follow this up with a more detailed and granular ordinance to put whatever teeth in it or whatever specificity in it you think was necessary. But I actually thought it was a good thing to have it in here. The second thing was the open meetings and public records. And really, quite frankly, as I recall this was something that came from the attorneys, which was basically, are we being redundant here? And make sure we're clarification in this new world order of the internet and electronic meetings and people virtually, just make sure that we were being consistent with the document, allowing for technology, making sure that we cover the ability to go into executive session for all the town bodies, which is an integral piece of their work when they can. And then Nancy had brought up, certainly from her position as the diversity task force, was there some language, if we were going to keep the notion of civility in here, was there some language in there relative to the importance of diversity that could be put in there? We have not seen any draft of that language. I haven't seen what that might look like. But to that point, Attorney Mednick did indicate that he knew of something and that would be something that they would be willing to put together. So those were the items, as I recall, when we reviewed this. And that's where I stood.
It's very helpful. All right, if there's nothing further on this.
I would, if I could, yeah, I'm just reading it again, if I may. Just maybe more of a question that even with this clause here, some of what you, Chairman Caffarelli, alluded to, I'm not sure that this paragraph would protect anybody from this. And so therefore I do feel in some ways to have a further study to make sure it's not so inclusive that it's exclusive of the thing we're trying to protect and uphold, and to make sure that it includes elected officials and the way we conduct ourselves. And that's why I do think it would be better served for a later time when it can be examined and explored outside of the charter. Not because what it's presenting here aren't things that should happen anyway, so I don't want people to think I'm not for order and civility. I am, but again, I don't know that this language would have done anything to protect what you experienced and described experiencing. So I think that we have an ability to be perhaps more effective and putting it in the right context. And maybe that context is through ordinance, maybe it's through personal responsibility, but I did want to just point that out.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful for our deliberations. First Selectwoman Kupchak.
So thank you, Chairman Caffarelli. I mean, I don't see the problem with having this in, honestly. I mean, this is a basic thing that's in most charters, I think. It's in Robert Rules of Order. It's just basic civility and decorum provisions. I think if the RTM, as Mr. Selectman Flynn mentioned, if they want to elaborate on it and give more teeth to it in some ordinance down the line someday, that's lovely, but I really don't think there's anything wrong with having it, and I think it says something about our community and about what we value and think is important.
Thank you. Any other questions for the select persons? Steve?
Can I just make some clarifications?
Yep, there's your hand. I didn't see it either, so there you go.
Yeah, thank you. Several points. Number one, and I'm not going to get into the particulars, but Robert's Rules is already in the charter. So the reiteration of Robert's Rules is not new, it's a reiteration. The section is set up specifically to allow for adoption of ordinances, to allow the RTM to expand on the constitutional standard that you're trying to set for civility. And there's a requirement that all boards and commissions really need to adopt rules, so that the charter is not the end. The charter is simply the beginning and the standard for the adoption of rules by boards and commissions, requiring a 2/3 vote to make sure that shifting partisan majorities don't skew the rules one way or the other. The rules are generally accepted rules. It's a pretty accepted parliamentary standard. With regard to the open meeting element of it, section 1.7 is currently in the charter twice. What we did is we moved the two references to them to the beginning so that they are generally applicable to all boards, commissions, departments of the town. And I am recommending something that Select Person Lefkowitz recommended, and that is there was an extra reference to open meetings in the RTM. It's been asked that we move it to this section or rely on this section. I will recommend that we do so. But the open meeting standard doesn't override state legislation that permits all bodies to have executive sessions. So there's nothing we could do in this charter to eliminate executive sessions. So the open meeting standard, which is currently in the charter, doesn't do it now, won't do it in the new charter. So I just want to make those points. And the last point, I know that language was developed on diversity on boards and commissions. I don't know if it went to the select people today, but it would be interesting, since that is new, whether there'd be any comment on that language.
I haven't seen this yet.
Well, Nancy knew about it.
That's really not fair. Okay, well,
Do you want me to read
is
it?
this your first time seeing that?
Yeah, we got an email late. We got an email this afternoon.
Read it into the record.
Yeah, reading the record.
And then can I borrow your copy? I'll be happy to read it into the record.
You guys get paid by the word?
We get
What?
paid by the word, we do.
Yeah, look at this.
This is under Article 1, new Diversity on Boards and Commissions, proposed Article 1, 1.8, entitled Diversity on Boards and Commissions. The active, informed, inclusive, and equitable engagement of community members, both individually and collectively, is an essential element of healthy civic life and a thriving local democracy. All appointing authorities should, to the fullest extent possible, take into consideration the diversity of its residents and the geographic areas of town when considering the composition of boards and commissions. Boards and commissions should reflect the diversity, including the race, color, ethnicity, religious creed, age, sex, national origin, ancestry, status as a veteran, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, familial and marital status, pregnancy, or physical and mental disability, and cultural makeup of the town in order to achieve a representative balance of its residents.
So,
Selectman Lefkowitz, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share with the commission on that one?
Yeah, on reading it through on the first time, I want to thank you for considering the inclusion of that language. My gut impression and first read is that that's an important addition.
Okay, well, that's good. And I think that we can continue this during our deliberations as well. I mean, it's hard to put people on the spot with the first impression of something that they're just hearing or seeing, so.
My first impression is a good one, to be clear.
Good, okay, well, that's positive. Then, so is there any other comments on that was just read or that matter from the Board of Select Persons?
No,
Okay.
I'll just add for the record that the first sentence of that draft came right from the Model City Charter 9th edition.
All right, and moving on to Article 4.
I would also add, if I may, as I'm just looking at it here, I see the email that was sent, that it probably should be a black or brown voice that you ask to consider. You know, my perspective as a white woman is, as I said, my first impression is a good one, but I do think that the point of view of one of our black and brown residents would also be an important perspective to get when considering this language.
Okay. But I mean, I think we'll have to get to that. We'll take that comment into consideration during deliberations. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just logistically, I'm not sure how we go about doing that at this point, but we'll consider that. Thank you.
I am happy to share language with select residents if that would be helpful, and hopefully hear some feedback.
That sounds good. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. So then on to number 4, Article 2, 7, and 8. Please consider reformatting current charts for readability and consistency. Do we have any questions on this one?
There were some charts in the old charter. They were clearer than the charts in the new charter.
Got it. Thank you. Number 5, hopefully we can move on like that. Article 2, Section 2.3A1 and 2, 2.3C1, A and B throughout the charter. Please review the necessity of separating the first selected person from the Board of Select Persons.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
This was more of a, this is what was told to me, or to us during our deliberations. This is more of a quote-unquote, check the drafting, because what had ended up happening is in an earlier draft of the charter, there's a thought to remove the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
So that they had the first select person separated. And then the fact that at some point during the drafting process, when that changed, maybe all the nits and gnats of doing this weren't caught. I don't think, the attorneys can tell me if I'm wrong, but this is how I remember the conversation. There was a full intent to separate out the first select woman or first select person in all these instances, but it just so happened that way.
Okay.
And it was go and clean that up. Is that a fair representation by the attorneys? Sorry, Jim.
Yes,
It's a,
Steve, you could speak to that.
yeah, it's a fair representation. It was done, I just went through it today because it's a relatively easy fix because it was only separated in several places, mainly in listings. It had no effect on anybody's authority, and so it's easily fixed if that's the direction that people want to take.
And if I may add to that, to what Attorney Mednick just
Please.
said, Chairman Caparelli.
Yep. Yeah,
It may
please.
not have any impact, but I do think there may be a psychological element that people are feeling, that may be an opportunity by not carving it out to give people the impression that it's the first select person role is part of the executive body, and therefore no need to call it out. And I think that may help in perception as well, reality-based or otherwise. It may.
No, I take your comment to heart, and anything we can do to help clarify that there is no expansion of authority to the first select person's office would be helpful. So if I'm missing something there, I would like to explore this with you and your comment. But there are instances in the charter where the first select person does have powers independent of the Board of Select Persons. So I'm not sure how they wouldn't be carved out, and, you know.
Yeah, forgive me, sorry.
Oh, no, I was done. So I'm happy to entertain what you have to say in that case.
Where the carve out, where the powers are in fact distinct and unique, absolutely feels appropriate. But just to be thoughtful or mindful because of what's being said, that if it doesn't need to be a carve out, then perhaps it's clearer, or it would be more appropriate to keep it as it exists in the current charter. Food for thought, really.
No, I'm hearing your words, but I'm not understanding, because I don't think there are instances in the charter as it stands right now where the first select person's carved out when the authority is not different of the board.
The first time I noticed it, and we talked about it. I'm looking where it's under the.
Understanding it did happen in an error, but I'm saying going forward for the psychological benefit of the whole town, how do we come to grips with that without actually separating the power, because it is separate, correctly?
No, not. I don't think. I think in Article 4, you say their Board of Select Persons and the first select person is the first time we saw it in the new recommended draft. So it was different than the initial. And then I'm just trying to look back at notes where it existed. Section, 5.1. I have a note that it was in section 5.1, but I just can't. It says the first select person, and then it says the first selectman and the Board of Selectmen equals the executive branch, but first selectman's listed twice. Again, I'd have to go back to the notes, and I would just say when it needs to be carved out because the power is distinct and unique to the first select person, that's obviously appropriate. But if it doesn't need to be called out or listed twice, that's an opportunity to not have that role singled out. Again, I can't call to specifics here. I have a note that says section 5.1, the subheading of Article 4 as well, but.
Well, that's great news then. So if that's what's driving this kind of issue with the power concentration, I'm happy to make sure that it's eliminated when it doesn't do anything, but I didn't know that happened. But if that's true, and I'm not being. I'm being sincere here, because
overall messaging.
This is a big issue, apparently, so I want to make sure that we all understand what the heart of it is. And so if there is really a problem here, I want to know exactly what it is.
I would refer you to the authors of whatever. I think I would refer you to the. I can't speak to the overall issue. I know that issues like the mediation and resolution we heard commentary on. We heard comments about the subtitle, but I think I am not speaking to the broader concern that some people have written to. I'm just pointing out areas for consideration here. So.
Can I okay. All right.
So can I just?
Sure. Brenda.
Yeah, I don't really understand what this is about. It seems strange. I don't understand what the problem is, but isn't the first select person the chairperson of the Board of Selectmen?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at.
So I don't know why this language is like, why is this a problem?
Jim, maybe can you?
It again goes to
a formatting issue. As Selectman Flynn explained earlier, there are many examples in the current charter where reference is made to the Board of Selectmen. And in one of the iterations, early iterations or iterations of this draft document, the first select person was carved out at that moment in time when there was consideration given to getting rid of the other select persons, getting rid of the full board. And when that concept was rescinded, the carve-out of the first selectman from the other select people remained, whereas before it said Board of Selectmen. So the request, as I understand it, coming from Selectwoman Lefkowitz, is to simply go back to the default general description of the Board of Select Persons rather than the first select person and the other select persons.
Oh.
It's that simple.
Okay.
And it's nothing else. And it's
All right, well,
not changing anything substantively.
well, maybe that's like number one, and this was a helpful question and answer session, and so,
So just with respect to what you just said, maybe where it says Article 4, Board of Select Persons and the first select person, maybe it should just say Article 4, Board of Select Persons, period.
Exactly.
That's,
yeah, I mean, if that will allay concerns, this is great. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we can certainly take that up during our deliberation. I do thank you for fleshing this out with us. Anything else on this matter? Number,
Can I just point something out for the record?
sure.
The title in the current charter is Board of Selectmen and First Selectmen.
Okay.
There is no change.
That won't.
Period.
So this is, no.
You know, and so what I did,
There are
and this is
examples.
even, yeah, so we'll talk about it tomorrow, but the separation came because the first selectman is the chief executive officer. That's the rationale for it, but there's very few places where it can be fixed. I've already kind of gone through it, and I'll be able to identify them for you tomorrow.
Okay, that's helpful. I think that's good, right? Okay. Number 6, please review the issue pertaining to the number of RTM members. Are there any questions on this? Please.
In I was at all the Board of Selectmen meetings, and I don't recall that I really got a sense of where the Board of Selectmen is on this issue as a group or individually, and that would be helpful to me, at least, in deciding
the RTM,
the number.
who wants to go?
Well, I mean, Chris, I think I was pretty clear from the beginning when I spoke to your commission, back when you invited me to share my thoughts. And I think I said so during even the Board of Selectmen meetings, that I actually thought we should have changed our form of government. I thought that we are sort of an outlier in a town this size. I thought we should be honest, to be bold and to do something different. So I always think smaller is better. I made this analogy the other day to someone who asked me this question, a resident, and I said, and I thought this was the best way to go about it, all our town boards are 7 or 9 members. Our Board of Finance is 9 members. They're in charge, they vote on our budget. The Board of Education, whose budget makes up 66% of the budget, is 9 members. And so I have trouble understanding why we would ever need a body that size of 40. It just doesn't make sense to me. I just think a more intimate body works better for government. And I'm a smaller government kind of girl, so I just think smaller is better as far as government goes. But I know there's a lot of angst about it, and there's been, a lot of politicization about it. Talking about lack of representation and a whole host of things. So honestly, I think 30 is a better number, but because there's been so much consternation, I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, I personally think it should have been smaller. think we should have had a town council, quite honestly. I think it would have benefited our residents a lot. And I think there would have been a lot more accountability, and I think there would have been a lot more collaboration between the bodies. But that didn't happen. So that's where I am.
So Brenda and I are from Big Tent Republican Party. We don't always have to agree on certain things. And in this form, we don't agree. I'm more of a traditionalist.
Like big government.
In terms of, I like division of power, separation of power, checks and balances, particularly after what this town has just been through in the last 5 years. So I respected the current form of government. Okay. That said, I think Brenda and others have made some very valid points related to the size of certain bodies and things like that. You asked very specifically where I am. I understand, having been kind of an insider for 18 years of doing this, what the RTM is all about and how it's changed over the last number of years. Never served on it, but I've dealt with the RTM and worked with the RTM for all that period of time. While I respect the idea to make it smaller, and I understand it because of that frame of reference, you didn't close the sale on me yet. You didn't close the sale on me yet. And that was a very specific conversation that Pam and I had, okay? There was a great amount of work done, and Pam's memo and John's memos were great, really theoretical documents discussing government and the form of government and smaller representation and what that means. And I respect those points of view, and they're theoretical. What I was looking for as kind of a brass tacks person when I said pros and cons was, what have our votes been like? If you're really going to want to change this, have our votes been that close? What is changing from 40 to 30? What does that actually mean in terms of, would the votes be different? Did things change that much? Does the RTM have a history of voting as a block? Do the Republicans vote one way? The Democrats vote this way, right? What does it do to our statistics? How many citizens do we represent as compared to some of the other towns? How many households do we represent? How many miles do we represent? How many students does the RTM represent? All those kind of statistics and metrics that a business person would look at and say, we need to look at this. What does this mean? Benchmark that against some of the other towns that have RTMs and just know where we stand. It'd be a good thing to know. The other thing is, truthfully, over the last decade, what's our attendance at the RTM meetings have been? We have the statistics. You can go back and look and say at 56 members, how many people attended? At 40 members, how many people attended? What is that percentage over that period of time, right? How many people have resigned over that period of time? When there were 40 members, did 5 members resign in a 2-year term? Did 2 members resign? None of that information is all available. None of it was presented to build the case that structurally, why is it better? What does it mean? What is the real reason to do it? To Fairfield, not the theoretical, but to Fairfield. What does it mean? Does it save us money? Does it cut down on the number of meetings? Does it streamline the committee system within the RTM? Right? That case, while it can be built probably, hasn't been. It hasn't been articulated. It hasn't been laid out. So if you're asking me, there's also that theory of not changing for change's sake, to just change. Okay, we're at 40. 40 seems to work pretty good right now, for the most part. I mean, the meetings are too long. There's things there, right? I get it. I've seen it, right? But why 30? Why is 30 the right number? Why is it not 27? Because if we could have the language here, because it's such a divisive debate in town right now, and say the Board of Selectmen isn't recommending 30 or 40, they're saying we should have a debate over 30 and 40 and put it, there's no purer form of democracy than putting it before the voters, which is all we're doing here, right? But if you're saying we're recommending it, as opposed to just saying put it before the voters, why am I recommending 30 and not 27? Why am I recommending 30 and not 35? That case hasn't been built for why 30 is the right number. And in the absence of that, what am I putting before the voters? So don't change just to change's sake. And the other thing is, when I immediately put you guys on the spot and said, why are we doing this? The first thing that came out, well, we couldn't actually come to consensus on changing form of government, so we just wanted to actually lower it and get closer. That, to me, is not a good enough reason to just change like that. So when I said pros and cons, what I said, if all of you very smart people, very learned people, very passionate people gave a lot of input into this, and I respect that enormously. So build me the case. And if you can't, maybe we don't touch it right now. And maybe we touch it after the case has been built, if that's the appropriate move. That's where I came from, and I hope that answers your question.
Very helpful, thank you.
Thank you.
May I
Yeah,
offer
please.
some thoughts?
Yeah, that's the,
Additional thoughts? Sorry, you ready for me?
yeah, please, Nancy, Selectwoman Lefkowitz.
I would actually echo everything that Mr. Flynn has just said. I would echo, but I would also add that the RTM is its own unique body. It's representative town meeting, and if I go back to what even the strategic planning committee had recommended, which was to study it in depth, and I would also concur that I don't believe that the data or analysis that's been provided to date really supports the rationale for changing it. I would argue that if people are concerned with its ability to function wholly, then it needs resources, perhaps the ability to have a budget, to hire an attorney, or to do other things, especially as it's going towards the committee structure. Reducing the size of the RTM would concern me because we need bodies, we need numbers to have a robust committee structure. Again, I just don't think that the analysis and the data has been really provided. It's not enough to say it's not efficient or people would be more accountable to the town. I just haven't seen evidence of that. And so to me, it's, again, I wouldn't want to put it in front of voters because I don't have confidence that the argument has been made that the answer to change it is a good one based on the information provided. So I think everything that I've advocated for a lot in this space I've said. So.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just say that I think that Commissioner Iacona and Wynn did give a very solid case, and they did provide data. They showed that our town, that most towns in the United States, less than 1% have an RTM left. And so the argument for me to say that our town or our RTM would run better if it had more resources, when the majority of towns, the data's there, what Commissioner Iacona gave to the commission and to us, it's there in the model city charter data. Towns have town councils or city councilors or boards of aldermen. RTMs are an outlier. They're antiquated, and there's hardly any left. And it's sort of it's a vestige of a colonial era, and they only exist in New England. So, I mean, I think it's a little arrogant to say other towns don't run good because they have a city council or a town council or a board of aldermen. I just think and the data's right there. It's an old-fashioned, antiquated form of government, and not many towns still have it. That's the only reason I really felt interested in that conversation and enjoyed reading that data, because I talk about modernizing all the time. You know, be more efficient, having a better run government, a more efficient government, more bang for your buck. And I personally don't, and I do attend all the RTM meetings, most of them, and I was on the RTM. I served on the RTM. with 50 members. And frankly, there was like maybe, less than 20 who were really actively engaged when I was on it, who did the homework, who read, who spoke, who went to other meetings, the Board of Selectmen meetings, the Board of Finance meetings, really stayed involved and engaged in the community. And frankly, I mean, I was the McKinley RTM member when the school had mold in it, and I went to 200 meetings in 1 year on OSHA and indoor air quality and everything else. And I think maybe one other RTM member from my district showed up to maybe a handful of those. I was that representative who was representing my district. So I see it differently. I don't think that it hurts our community to have a smaller legislative body. I just don't. And the evidence is there. Pam showed it to us. I read it. I just think that our town, it seems through this process, while I've watched the commission meetings, I've seen such pushback about change. People are so afraid of change. I heard the word fear. I fear. I heard that word come up so many times during this process in the last year. And I don't know, I'm just not afraid of change. And I think the data is there that and again, I think Selectman Flynn's right, I mean, I don't know what bang or buck we get for 30 to 40. I mean, is it easier for each party to find more dedicated candidates to run when you have a smaller amount of seats to fill? Yeah, I would think so. I mean, Mr. Mottola, when we were on the RTM, I mean, it's hard to find people to run for the RTM. A lot of times let's face it, you say, oh, it's one meeting a month. Don't worry about it. Just run. And then they're like, wait, it's more than one meeting a month. But I don't know. I think it's gotten way too, like a hot potato, and I don't think it really should. I mean, we could talk about it just honestly. Sure.
Yeah. So I think the first select woman raises some valid points in terms of the discussion about the form of government. That entire argument was about the form of government, not 30 to 40. And it's a valid argument and a valid discussion and maybe a long-term discussion that the town should have about the form of government, if in fact we want to have that discussion. And maybe that's a separate discussion worthy of consideration. So I don't discount that at all. My thing was 30 to 40. And that's where you asked my question on 30 to 40. That's where the case hasn't been made. You'd have to show me a similar analysis to say go to the other form of government. But I'm open to it. That case could be made in the future, right? I don't think that case can be made right now. That's where I come on it. The one thing that did come out of this, and thank you as well for highlighting this, because I really was not aware of this, was this whole that the RTM gets to self-determine its size. I don't agree with that at all. That's like letting the Supreme Court do that, or letting our Board of Finance do that. I just don't agree with that. I think that should actually be probably, and maybe a charter question, or rather a voter question, in my opinion. But that's just me.
Right?
Yeah,
Didn't we put it to change that part?
I think they had changed it. Had you not?
You didn't send districts back to us.
Okay, well, not districts.
We fixed it.
Yeah, it was,
Meaning like it is affixed.
yeah,
Can't be determined.
yeah.
They can't determine their
The
own size.
RTM will no longer decide by ordinance.
That's
Regulated.
thank you for that. That's what I
That's not
had thought.
good, though.
Yeah, I'm just saying I'm very thankful that you did that. See, so I'm not always against change.
As someone who sat on the redistricting committee twice, believe me.
Yeah. Was that discussion helpful?
Could I add
No.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, Nancy?
I just wanted to add a follow-up, if I may add a follow-up comment to what Mr. Flynn just said, because for me, it's not the change I fear. It's what Mr. Flynn just pointed out. It's changing the form of government is a different discussion than changing the existing legislative body, which again is not, it's not, you talk about the model city, but that's really when you're talking about changing the form of government. Here we're talking about changing the number of an existing body. And
Accurate.
so I just wanted to say that, we've talked about it's hard to find candidates, but again, that's incomplete data in my mind, because what we should be doing then is perhaps looking at the political parties and how we recruit candidates, but that's not necessarily advocating in one direction or another for reducing the size of the RTM just because we can't find candidates. To me, what that suggests is that we're not going about it perhaps in the best, most efficient way, and maybe that can be looked at. But to me, just the number from 30 to 40 at this point still feels arbitrary without solid backing of why that 30 would be better, because we aren't talking about a change in the form of government, and that should be a longer term study perhaps, because I don't think people are afraid of change. I think people, what they're responding to is what feels like in some ways just an arbitrary change from 10 people for 10 people. So.
Did you have a follow-up question?
I do, I'm sorry, and I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just want to correct for the record, there's a misconception here that the research and the data that I provided was not on changing the form of government. And to Selectman Flynn's point on data, I absolutely hear you, and that makes complete and total sense to me. But if you really read what I wrote, and it was long, I admit it, that's not, the two issues are completely different. The National Civic League and what they do is study what are best practices that can be adopted and molded for governments. And that's what the research shows. It's not about councils or moving to manager councils. It's about size and effectiveness and all of the things that were highlighted in there that translate to governments across the whole that you can use to obtain best practices. And that's what the data showed, was smaller legislative bodies, period, end stop. Now, absolutely, totally agree on the data and the numbers, and I have a whole workup for you whenever it's appropriate to present that. We can do that. But just as a preview of coming attractions, our attendance rate improved. When we went from, when we were at 50, it was 89.4%. We're at 40, it's 85.6. So, I know, I'm just, I do,
That's the opposite.
the other way, sorry, yes. But my point being, I just do want to correct what's out there in that document, because I've read some comments too in the press, and it's just not accurate. And I admit that the thing is long and it takes time to read, but if you read through the whole thing, that's really what it is. It's not.
And Commissioner Iacono, I wasn't actually, when I made that comment, I wasn't referring to your paper. Your paper was very good. It was very theoretical, very detailed, as you said. I did read it, lengthy though it was. What it didn't do is it didn't bring in, as you and I discussed, this stuff related to Fairfield specifically. That was it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and again, let's keep this to questions. Sure.
I'll debate this issue.
No, not you. I was trying to.
I just, Pam, I appreciate what you just said, but that model doesn't take into consideration that Fairfield has a board of selectmen. It's different. And I agree that if we got rid of the board of selectmen, which we were looking at, we needed to have a smaller legislative body. No doubt about it. So you can't compare that to what we have in Fairfield right now. That's all I wanted to say. And we can debate this when it comes. We've debated this ad nauseum. You guys have to decide what you want to do. You really do, period. Sure. And I don't think it's appropriate, with all due respect to my commission members, that you're trying to make the case now. The case should have been made a month ago when we presented this to you and you asked us the questions. And I don't think we as a commission gave you good answers. And so we're trying to do it after the fact. And I think that's inappropriate because it doesn't engage the public in the process. So if you're getting emails or letters from commission members why we should be doing this and trying to make the case now, I don't think that's appropriate. That's all.
Well, I would just say, John, that And I understand what you're saying, but also, I mean, I know I watched all your meetings, so I heard you guys talk about it. So I heard you guys have pretty in-depth conversations, really heady conversations. You know, the work that John and Pam did was nice to have, but I was listening, you know, to what you were saying.
And respectfully, make your decision based on our discussions at our meetings, not trying to make the case after the fact. That's all I'm saying. That's it.
No, and listen, as an elected official and as Tom and Nancy, we do our own homework, right? I mean, we're responsible for doing homework for our own items too. I'm not relying just on you to tell me things. I can look things up just like anybody else and read things and come to conclusions. So I just wanted you to know that I thought that your meetings were good and I enjoyed your discussions, even though sometimes you got a little heated.
Do you have a question? Okay. Go ahead.
Not necessarily a question, just an observation that nothing's trying to be done after the fact. The discussion was had at our meetings multiple times at various levels of detail. The Board of Selectmen has asked for clarification and a better understanding of what was being contemplated, looked at, reviewed, and evaluated by the commission members. And that's the only information that would be provided to the board. Back to them now in response to their specific question on that topic.
All right, well, thank you for clarifying that.
Well, you know, let me add this. So I get what you're saying. I'm frustrated by the process as well. I do think that we did discuss this exhaustively at great length. And for those who watched it and read all the documents, thank you. But you know, I think part of the deliberations were, and there is a question here, and it's for Selectman Flynn, is that we did agree with the concept that a smaller government is more efficient, that no matter what the size, right, that we needed to somehow accomplish that. And the number is a function of an agreement because we wanted consensus among this body so that we could show unity to not only the Board of Selectmen, but to the community. So I hear a list of data that you're looking for, but that data could be used to make an argument either way. You ask, are there more meetings or less meetings with more commissioners? I mean, more RTM members. Well, I can make the argument that it's a more efficient government if they have one meeting a year. So there's a disconnect to me in our discussions and landing on policy decisions vis-a-vis what Pam laid out and John laid out in their memo, which I view to be recaps of what we had discussed, and going to find data that may support one way or another, which I don't quite frankly understand what result would make it happy to be 30 or 40 when all you have to do is understand the philosophical debates that we've had about the size of government, about the accountability, about the constituent services. Moreover, I find it confusing that we're asked to look to other towns and then told that this is just Fairfield, so not to compare us to other towns. So I don't know exactly what would satisfy, and then Nancy echoed that she agreed with these requests. I don't understand where this gets us. So it's very confusing.
So,
May I?
go ahead, Nancy, you can go first, sure.
Because I think, you asked the point, and I would just say back, and you use the phrase philosophically, and for me, maybe it does come down to a philosophical argument in terms of accountability and representation. And to me, I just don't think that the case has been made. And I don't necessarily think here in this instance that changing from 40 to 30 based on the meetings I listened to, based on what I've read, based on all the things that have been presented. And yes, to echo Commissioner Wynn, we did say, what is the why of it? And that's, I think, the specific question that you set out to address along with Commissioner Iacono. And so I appreciated getting that information, but I still don't believe philosophically that changing from 40 to 30 addresses the accountability issue, and again, the smaller government piece, to me, I don't necessarily agree with that notion that we should be changing from 40 to 30 based on that. So again, maybe I'm in the minority position here on this board, just from a philosophical perspective, but then I add the analysis piece and the data piece, and given what's been presented, while it may be sufficient to make some of us agree with what's being presented as 30 as an opportunity, for me, it doesn't make the case, that's all. So, I don't want you to look at this as like, oh, we've gone in circles. Like, I think we've really had to take in all of this information to arrive at where we have individually landed. And for me, I've landed in a place after taking all of this in where I don't think it makes sense to change.
Okay.
I want to directly, and I thought it was a good question. And by the way, thank you for the discussion. I think this is great. And I did hold back until it was actually formally presented to our board to address you, because I didn't want to tip the scale in one way or another. I told you that several times previously, right, that I wouldn't do that. I would wait for the presentation, you, the chairman, right? And I said I would wait for presentations and make there. You address one side of the equation. The one thing I've learned, the difference between government and business, and I'm more on the business side than the government side, is there's built-in inefficiencies in government. There's built-in separation of powers and separation of duties in government. It's built that way to provide accountability and responsibility. I'm not giving a civics lessons here. Your entire argument that you just made was efficiency. We would be more efficient. Well, hell, the most efficient form of government would be a dictatorship.
Right.
Let's just elect one person and all go home, right? The issue is it's efficiency and balancing that with effectiveness. And the town of Fairfield, and I'm not saying other towns aren't run well, and I'm not saying a town council and a town manager can't run a town well. In the history of our town, for however long we've had this form of government, by pretty much most measures, with some exceptions, we've been pretty effective. So how do we balance that efficiency with that effectiveness? That was the argument that wasn't made to me, right? Was the efficiency versus the effectiveness. What does this mean? What are we going to get better? What decisions are we going to get better? How is this going to work more, not just more efficiently, but also more effectively to reach the best decision possible for the town? 30 versus 40, not different form of government, I get that. 30 versus 40, right?
Okay.
And that's what I wasn't getting out of the arguments. That's the case that really hasn't been made to me.
I guess I'm just asking, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
so effective, if I didn't say it, I meant to say it, because that's what was in these documents here, is that size directly correlates to effectiveness. But what will show that it's effective?
But where have we been ineffective? Why? Give me the reason to change now from 40 to 30. The fill pile? Is that the reason? I don't know, right? I mean, that was, as my father used to say, when people collude, locks keep honest people honest, right? The fact that we had dishonest people, perhaps, allegedly, right? All the qualifiers, right? Those questions were asked. We asked specific questions at the Board of Finance. John was there. We weren't told, presumably, from what we've later found out, the right answers. I don't know that any form of government's going to get to that if people are standing up and not giving the right answers. So that's where I came out. So but I get it. The other side of it is I've been around long enough that I know internally from working with the body why 30 would be more efficient. I get it, but the case just hasn't been proved on a public level to show why we're doing this, why you would do that. That's my problem with it.
Thank you for that clarification.
So I would just jump in at the end of this, maybe to wrap it up, is the commission's had a whole lot of discussion about this, and the Board of Selectmen now is having it. But I haven't heard anybody say why we should make the decision and not the public. Who are we? why aren't we in a democracy, everybody's saying we love our democracy, we want voters to be able to vote on stuff. So then why aren't we just throwing it, single question on the ballot and let the voters of the town of Fairfield vote if they'd like to have it or not?
And I had this discussion with Pam, and I think I tried to say it earlier, but it's then, why isn't it 25? Why isn't it 20? Like, it's too open-ended that way. Hey, 40 or 30, take your pick. Why 30? We know 40, we're there. We've got a history with it. Why 30?
Pick a number between
Right, well, that's the problem I have.
10 to,
That's the problem I
40.
have.
You
Right.
pick.
And that goes back, Brian, to your question about the stats. Why is 30 the right number? Why was that? What statistically? Tell me why that's the right number. You know?
So I think it just comes back to, do we think we know better than the voters, or do we want to let the voters have an opportunity to vote? That's all. That's how I feel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna-
That's helpful.
Please excuse me for a minute.
And this, J-Rig vote.
All right, any other questions on this? You have to go?
No, I don't have to go.
Yeah, I know that was somewhat of a rhetorical question, but I think, again, philosophically, because as elected officials, we're often put in a position where we have to make decisions about what goes before the voters, and I just think it's, at this point, arbitrary. Why don't we put lots before the voters? Because it's our job to make some tough decisions, and I just don't think that this one the case has been made, because it is still too arbitrary for me. So I just don't support it. But I wanted to point that out, that we're often in a position where we have to make decisions on behalf of the constituency, and I just don't think it's there. So I wanted to answer that somewhat rhetorical question, which I imagine.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think, John, you have something.
No, I was just going to report the Mets are winning 1-0, bottom of the third inning. I thought you guys would want to know that. Thank you.
Are you like the only Mets fan?
I'm probably the only Mets fan in the room, yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking you are.
And that's why you understand the way I am, so.
Although our park and rec director went to the game last night, we met in Yankee game, so maybe he's a Mets.
All right.
Lighten up the mood a little.
Yeah, that was nice.
How are the Yankees doing, John? That's what we really want to know.
No, they're playing the Yankees.
Oh, they're beating the Yankees? Oh, we don't like that.
Okay, so, number 7. Yeah.
Oh, it's a Subway season.
Please review the issue of filling a vacancy on the Board of Select Persons. Do we have any questions on this? Okay.
Is it okay for me to have a question?
Yeah, sure.
Because this comes out of conversations I've had with the Selectwoman Lefkowitz and others in her party, Judy Ewing included, and the idea, as I understood it, was to eliminate the possibility of having a petition for a special election which would take place not during a normal election cycle. In other words, we had the situation recently where that special election took place in June or July, in the middle of the year, and it's very disruptive. And so my understanding is that the concept was to make that special election, should it be necessary, occur at the next election, the next general municipal election. But I seek guidance on that because there are some nuances there that need to be teased out. And John Matola, you're raising your hand, so maybe you can illuminate me further on that.
We did get a draft of this.
Yeah, that's language from me, and it's very rough, and I've already made edits to it.
Okay.
But I need guidance. So before I make any further edits or proposals, I need guidance on what's truly intended.
So I'm assuming the intent is, as you've indicated, that we don't want, you can have a situation where someone's elected first select person and 6 months in the office, unfortunately passes away, and then you could be theoretically stuck with an unelected first select person for, 3.5 years. And certainly I don't think any one of us wants wants that. So I think the intent is to try to fix that scenario. And that's, I think, what this language is trying to do.
My,
I guess the question I have, first of all, if I understand we want to appoint somebody to fill the position temporarily until the next general municipal election, but what happens if the two members of the Board of Selectmen can't agree on the temporary filling of the position?
there's an answer to that.
What's the answer?
The answer is found in the general statutes. We would
Okay.
follow that procedure, and it's been followed before in the town, where it goes to the elected officials from the same political party as that which was held by the person whose office is now vacant. And so if there's an inability to agree, then it goes to those elected officials, and they decide and they vote. And there's even a provision.
Is it statutorily?
That's statutorily, but I'm not suggesting we follow the statute, because if we followed the statute exactly, you afford for the possibility of this special election in the middle of the year, which people don't want. But we would borrow that language and take that logic, and thereby the office would be filled. But if I understand the concept correctly, the desire is still there to have that term which is now being temporarily filled, right, would just be until the next general municipal election. And that's one of my fundamental questions. Is that the case?
Well, I'm assuming that was a concern of the Board of Selectmen, right? And that's why it's before us.
Yeah, well, I mean, if one of,
Yeah,
Chris.
can I just clarify one point? So in the example you had, the appointed person would be the first selectman for a year and a half.
Right,
Then there'd be a municipal election for the remainder of the 2-year term.
right.
And then there'd be the full, in the 4-year term then.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Right. Now, there are nuances here, because there are provisions whereby you must have the ability to nominate people and have primary and that sort of thing. So in the statute, as it currently exists, the state statute, the cutoff date is July 1st, I believe. And so if the vacancy occurred or was not filled until after that date, you have the potential, therefore, to go 2.5 years or 2 years and 5 months, as the case may be. But the scenario that you painted is the one that I believe people are trying to avoid. And if that's the case, I'll come up with the language, but I didn't want to work further on it until I get guidance from Nancy or yourself or whomever is advocating for that.
I think, without speaking for members of the commission, I think we all had a concern, at least I did, of having someone in office appointed for a number of years who hasn't been elected. And I think we should try to correct that, and at least that's.
And if I may, it's more consistent with the way vacancies are filled on other elected boards and commissions, or other elected boards and commissions. It goes to the next general municipal election. So it would make sense.
And I think, given that, if I may,
Yeah, I think we're looking for clarity from a select person who had this resolution put in, so that would be.
well, I think the point was, after the Board of Selectmen term changed from a four-year to a 2-year, I'm sorry, in reverse, 2-year to a 4-year term, a provision wasn't made, and we got into that sort of kerfuffle a few years ago. And I think, based on, it would be good to know, and I don't know, not a lawyer, what other towns do. I'm sure this is not unique to us, and I think the idea is to avoid the situation we had a few years ago. So it would be really good to know what is out there in terms of what other towns are doing. I can't imagine it is unique to us. I guess I would wonder, like, if the people wanted a special election, and I'm just saying this now, do the residents have an opportunity? It would need to go back on the ballot, so I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know, do other towns ever have special elections. We don't want to spend residents' money unnecessarily, again, based on what had happened several years ago. But I do think we should be looking at what's best practice.
I can answer that question. Most municipalities that have a Board of Selectmen follow the state statute. Our charter is unique and very different from most municipalities in that it has longstanding language that is slightly different from that which is in the statute, and that was the gist of or the crux of the lawsuit that occurred. And I believe that the idea, as it's been communicated to me, is to avoid the special election in the middle of the year and the petition and the extra expense and angst and whatever else might be associated with that that's undesirable, and to just by default automatically kick it over to the next general municipal election. And because our charter has this exception already, I think Attorney Mednick would agree that we are allowed to tweak it in that manner. And if that's the desire of people, that's what my effort would be towards. But if you want Nancy to allow for the petition and the special election to take place at any other time other than the general election, then that's just defaulting to the Connecticut general statutes. But that's not what I understood to be the request, and that's why I spoke up and asked to clarify that, because there's a big difference.
One of the other issues here, and we need to be very careful, we'll look at this tomorrow. I told the town attorney we'd focus on this tomorrow. And that is, there's a court case which has validated this particular provision. This is not something the commission looked at all. It's not an issue that was raised during the process. It wasn't raised during the initial public hearings, wasn't raised during any of our proceedings. It was raised at this stage. And if you start looking at best practices in other communities, you're going to be looking at special act provisions. You're going to be, and as I think the town attorney did point out, most of the other RTM communities do this by statute. I was just talking to a town attorney in another community where this kind of election, a Board of Selectmen, it wasn't an RTM town, it was a town meeting town. They've just gone through the interpretations of the statute in central Connecticut. So it's a very nuanced issue, and I think the town attorney is going to need to understand exactly what it is you're looking for, because this is a new issue that was not addressed by this commission in the last 11 months. But we'll take a look at it tomorrow and see what we can do. And let me tell you, and I had an experience with one of my towns, did not follow my advice on the succession clause, and we had to go to the General Assembly for special legislation because the charter would only take us so far. And so we need to be very careful when we start meddling, when we start moving and trying to maneuver election provisions.
Thank you, Selectman Flynn.
Yeah, this was brought to our attention, I believe, in our deliberations by the attorneys themselves. And as I recall, isn't that right, Jim? It might have been Mr. Mednick, but I thought you guys are the ones who brought up.
It was brought to my attention by Nancy Lefkowitz and Mr. Scheinberg at the DTC and others who are familiar.
Yeah, and we talked. Go ahead.
Hold on, Nancy, can you just
Yeah.
please finish?
We didn't, at our table, we didn't really speak about special elections and stuff like that. We spoke of needing to address this specific issue. Since your guys' work is ongoing, I will just say my personal point of view is special elections are very difficult because turnout is historically so low. And, I just, and maybe this was silly me, when we discussed this issue, I just assumed and was comfortable with handling it the way we had handled other vacancies where the next municipal election that comes up, the position is on the ballot. The only sticky wicket there becomes when you're dealing with minority representation. And in this case, if Nancy were to resign, having two Democrats fight it out for one spot. I don't know how that works. But that was the way that I had seen it. So if you're just looking for some guidance from my perspective, that's what I would provide.
Thank you, that is helpful. I'm sorry, Nancy, did you have something to, Selectwoman Lefkowitz, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think it became an issue of importance when I was sitting down with Attorney Baldwin, because I recognized it as one of the actual, real issues around a disagreement or a different interpretation of statute. And it was an issue of importance, both in time, energy, and otherwise to the constituents and to the political situation in town. So, to me, it became something that was important to address because I remember it as being an issue. And this is actually before I think I was even involved in politics. And I would say that if the cleanest thing to do is to revert to statute and take out the unusual language, then maybe that's the fix. But it came from a place of acknowledging that we had a problem, that there wasn't a fix for it, and that we had an opportunity to have something codified in the charter to avoid future issues.
Can I just follow up and ask on a more broader level, do you see a concern with, I think Commissioner Rotolo brought it up, is that, bringing something new to the process at this point after the public and the commission itself hasn't had the time to take it through the process all the other items do? Do you see that as a challenge? And I don't want to have more public outcry if we kind of start considering new things after the fact. Are you
asking me that question?
Yes, because I think that you're the one asking for this to happen.
Well, only in that I brought it up now in early July, so I did bring it up, so I don't know how to answer that. I mean,
Okay.
as I said, it was we recognized it as an issue and something that was a great concern to the town, and it cost energy and money and frustration and dissent and unnecessary negative partisanship. And so if it was codified to resolve, I think we have an opportunity.
Okay.
So I don't know how to answer your question. I mean, I think.
That's fair. I think John Matola has something to say.
I have a legal process question then. So, and maybe this is for Steve and then Jim. So if this Board of Selectmen during their deliberations said, we want you to look at this part of the charter that we never looked at, is that allowed at this stage? Steve?
His thinking cap is on, I think.
Did he hear you?
Steve, did you hear us?
Steve, did you hear me?
Is anybody there?
I think you were asking whether this was appropriate to raise at this stage in the process. In the broadest sense, no, because it was not. It was just a recodification of a section that was raised that's in the charter, but because it's recodified and because it was included in our report, generally, I did not object to the raising of the issue. But if you want to be technical, you need to be careful about dealing with these issues. But I think we believed in fundamental fairness. The issue was raised, and so I did not raise an objection. But if you asked me to be strict about it, it would be it was not an issue that came before the body. Your body was not acted upon by your body, except in the sense that it was reorganized and included in our final report. But it was not detailed in the transmittal letter because it's a section we didn't do anything with.
Well, we did talk about it, I remember, and we didn't change anything to it. So technically, we did consider it. I remember talking about the case.
Again, I took a very liberal view on it, and I'm not objecting to consideration.
Okay.
But it's pushing it a little bit.
You got to, Attorney Baldwin, do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the commission looking at this with the guidance from the Board of Select Persons. And yeah, I have an opinion myself, but I'll hold off on that. But yeah, I don't have an issue with it.
And to be clear, it was voted on by the Board of Select Persons. It's one of the
It's
resolutions.
in the resolution. I think it's,
Okay.
that question has been asked and answered.
Yeah, all right. I just wanted to make sure. Thank
And
you.
I would look at it as Brenda, the first select woman, said earlier, she gave you the whole charter. And said, look at the whole thing.
It wasn't just me.
No, I know. It's all her.
It was the whole board of selectmen.
Fair point.
Thank you, PMI Kono. I just want to say,
That was good.
well, I do, my only caveat is if we're going to go down here and we're going to do this, that there is going to be a very clear understanding by everybody involved in the request and the action to tell the public that this was out there in the resolution, and I just don't want there to be any blowback that we took something up that we shouldn't have taken up and added another piece of consternation in public feedback. That's a
fair.
big
that's fair.
concern of mine.
That's very fair.
John, I agree with that 100%, and that's why we're talking about it now. And that's why I'm asking those questions, Pam, right now, just to make it clear that I think we have the authority to do this, but I do agree with you 100% on that. So, thanks.
Okay, did you have something, Mr. Vice Chair?
Can I say something in defense of the opportunity that the commission has to take it up and what I would say publicly, what I want to say on the record publicly, why I think it's important to take it up?
Sure.
It's just to say that if there is blowback, I would argue that this, again, using what I had just stated earlier, this was one area of concern, it was an issue, and that the CRC has an opportunity to correct so that we don't get into that situation again. So you had I would even use the word obligation because you are looking at the whole charter and you had been looking at the whole charter, and it is part of this resolution. So, I would publicly push back anyone that had anything to say against you taking this up.
Okay, well, we may need your cover if we go down that road.
Have it. You can press play on what I just said.
Let's see here.
I volunteer Nancy to be out front on that.
No, 8:19 on July 27th, for the record, Prue. Number 8, please review the issue of deleting the role of parliamentarian as to whether required an independent third party or member of the body.
Defining, not deleting.
I'm sorry, I can't even read here. Defining.
I think that was Nancy.
Yes.
Is this, do we have any questions?
It's not more complicated than that. It was just, when we looked through this with a fine-tooth comb, so to speak, forensically, we asked if a clarifying sentence was necessary. We
Okay.
couldn't have you look at it if it wasn't in the resolution.
Perfect.
So perhaps taking 4 minutes to have that conversation,
Gladly.
nothing more.
All right, number 9, please review the issue of the time frame for holding of referenda.
Also, my recommendation, just to match what state statute says about holding voting hours, because it would be more inclusive to allow for a more robust participation if you extended the hours to be reflective of what the state voting hours are.
Okay, sounds good.
We all agree with that.
Oh, perfect.
Should be normal voting hours.
Number 10, please compare the meeting standard in 4.2A with 2.3 DA.
Language inconsistency about the
Is it
start dates,
drafting?
that's all. It was
Yeah.
just to check. I think it was perhaps errata, or maybe just, there was some confusion. I remember back when we were put into office about start dates and whatnot, and between the two articles and clauses, it's just different. That's all.
Got it, yep, I think so. Not seeing any questions. Number 11, please review
Well,
the,
just point out,
Steve, we were on a roll.
it's not a RADA. That's two different things, and we'll talk about it tomorrow night.
He had
but
the
it's not
sale,
a
and
RADA.
he didn't want it.
One deals with the commencement of the term, and the other deals with the first meeting. And I think it's an issue we discussed very early in the process. There are two different dates, but we can talk about that tomorrow.
Okay. Let's leave those tomorrow things for tomorrow.
I would just point out, I think that it just needed clarifying. I think it was confusing, and the interpretation was confusing back then. That was why we brought it up.
We're on number 10 still? Okay. 11.
We have a lot to go, huh? Yeah.
We made it to 11. Review the.
We're on a roll.
No, we are. Review the provision pertaining to the approval of the Board of Education by the Board of Select Person and consider lowering the threshold from 100,000 to 50,000. Okay,
100,000 to 50,000 was me.
okay.
The Board of Education one, was that the attorneys? Was that based on your discussion with the Board of Education attorneys? So that was that whole kerfuffle that came up on the drafting issue related to overstepping of bounds and that. So put that to the side. That was the legal one. I think we all know we're bound by state statute anyway. There was the other provision that was added related to these specific forms of contracts, which don't come up often. But quite frankly, just as a finance guy, I thought having it at 100,000 was too high an amount, and I just said, let's lower that in half to 50,000. I didn't hold myself to the same standards that I held you guys in terms of going 40 to 30, but I did go to 50 here and split the baby. I will admit my hypocrisy.
Very good.
Right, there you go. But
I
there we
wish
go.
I had thought of that.
But I'm sure you did. But you got to know the room. But anyway, that's what I did to say that it was a tighter control by 100%, and that's why. And I think the first select woman and Nancy supported me on that.
So on that other question, we can say we used the Flynn standard of analysis on the RTM.
You didn't go to
evaluation?
20, you went to 30. What can I say?
All right, number 12, add the term "or the town" to the end of the sentence in Article 4, 4.2B, 4C. Yeah, okay, moving on. Number 13, please
Wait,
review.
going back to that, it's just curious, or the town, is that just confusing, that whole statement? Because who gets to raise, are we taking powers from the executive branch on them raising what an issue is that the town needs to, that's important to the town, and who are we providing that to? It's just kind of confused that statement to me.
So is there a question to the select persons, or should we discuss this tomorrow?
I don't know what this is.
Oh,
Well, I was curious who raised
Oh, I
it, if I could
gotcha.
elaborate on what
Okay.
the explanation
I think
for
it's
adding that.
Perfect.
Nancy's.
all right.
This might have been Nancy.
Let's see, we need to get
Would you like
that.
me to clarify?
If you can, yeah, that'd be great.
I can. I think it just allowed the public to feel that they were empowered to raise issues. It sort of codified something that if it's not important to specific members of the Board of Selectmen or the RTM, that they were empowered to kind of raise it. It just stated what I think hopefully is clear to people, that when they have an area or an issue of concern, they can bring it up. But it sort of by charter says, hey, if this is an issue that matters to you, raise it. Again, it's just a clarifying sentence and allows for a sense of inclusion.
I would understand the issue of someone raising some topic, but then who ultimately gets to decide, is this an issue that needs to be taken up by the town and be addressed? Because it reaches a level of importance. Who is that authority? Who is that authority vested in? It remains in the Board of Select Persons, correct?
Yeah, I don't think it's speaking to the authority to act on it. I think what it's doing is empowering the ability to speak up.
But do we need this in the charter? I mean, people have the ability to speak up all the time. I mean, I'm not sure what this
Okay.
means.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
Because I think it'll put this to rest. I think that Selectwoman Lefkowitz has failed to neglect that the current language is concern of the town. And during the drafting, we qualified the concerns of the board. And I think what she was requesting is that we place the town concern back in the provision. In the current charter provision, it is section 6.1, I believe. That language that she's requested is there, so it's in the current charter. I just wanted to emphasize that for the record.
Thank you.
A4C. Are we,
No, so we're just putting words back in?
You're reverting back to the
Original.
charter language.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Still the Board of Selectmen has power to do it.
It's the current charter language.
It's the Board of Selectmen power, but it's got to be of concern to the town. It's got to be, it shouldn't be a matter of concern to Westport or Trumbull. It's got to be a concern of Fairfield.
oh, okay.
Okay, go to the next one, Brian.
All right, good.
Hurry, Brian.
Trying, I'm back on track here. 13, please review the capital plan issue in subparagraph 5 and compare to subparagraph 6 for redundancy and coordinate with the budget function in Article 9 and the reporting issues in subparagraph 8. And these are all found in Article 4.
Yeah, so I can explain some of the things if you want, and then Jim can talk about the language.
I can address that if the first select person doesn't want to address it. I looked at it today.
Do you want?
Well, there was a couple of different parts to the, oh, is it on? There was a couple of different parts to this. If this is the one we were talking about, the budget, right, Attorney Mednick?
This is related to it. This is on your side of the equation, yes.
But is this the capital piece we were talking about? Or
Yes.
I know it's got the reporting and the capital, all that, so I know Tom talked about changing the reporting, because that didn't really make sense. But then I think there was a little mix-up regarding capital, and the way it's outlined in the proposed language, and so for clarification purposes, the town is got a capital workshop that I put together. We are going to, we've already met and we put together the first year, and then we're going to reconvene in the fall and put together a 5-year capital plan, which is something we're supposed to have. Not necessarily a voted on capital plan, just a 5-year capital plan on the books. So I think what we talked about was having the next year, so when, for example, when we open up the budget process in 23, no, this year, 22, I mean 24.
Right.
The 24-25 capital list, we discussed back and forth, should we do it before the budget process? Should we do it after the budget process? Should we do it concurrently? But then, as I thought more about it and talked about it with Jared, to me, I think it makes sense is once that 24-25 year capital is made up, is confirmed by the workshop group, and it's not a vote, it's just a consensus, that, and that's with input from all the department heads, that the department head during the budget process would provide their operating budget and also their capital. So for example, you know, you're the police, you're operating, and then you say, okay, and here's my one capital item, or here's my whatever. So then that way we have the boards and commissions in this scenario where we're going to be together can hear it all at once. And then we can choose, they can choose how to vote on those. They wouldn't necessarily vote the capital list during the operating budget, but they would hear it. and understand it, know it, be public. And then you'd have your capital potentially being voted on soon after or before the operating budget's voted on. But the way it was written before, John, like, it was like kind of, and it didn't make sense. And I think what happened, the 5-year plan kind of got thrown in there, and it was like, oh no, now we're talking about a 5-year plan during the whole operating budget. You know, we're all gonna want to run screaming from the room. Let's try to, tighten this up, and what do we want to do, right? How do we want to handle it? And I thought that would be a really efficient way to do it, because it already would be vetted by the working group. And then the boards and commissions could hear it from the actual department head, DPW, police, fire, whatever it is. Park and Rec. And then make the decision
Right.
about which items they want to pursue and put on the Board of Selectmen agenda, Board of Finance agenda, and RTM agenda. Either individually or solely, or as a package. So the way I think, Attorney Mednick, we talked about this, and you put some language together to make it, it's not, but it's in there, so that we do have a capital list that everybody can see.
The way, based on the concerns that the first select person raised, the language in there is consistent, because the language just talks about the ensuing year capital plan. So
Yeah.
the ensuing year capital plan will be part of the budget process. The 5-year planning mechanism will still be separated, except the last year of it goes into the budget, basically the ensuing year.
Yeah.
Go into the budget. So
If
the
I-
language in 4 and 5 will be fixed to reflect that change.
If I might, right, having some experience with this, I would leave the timing of when you do the capital plan open to allow for the potential to do it well before the budget process, well before the operating budget process. Okay, and hear me out, okay? When I first got on to the Board of Finance many years ago, they tried to do the capital plan commensurate with the operating budget right along the same time. What ended up happening was that, and many of us around this table have been involved in that process, that becomes such an intense period of time with everybody focusing on the operating budget, because of course that is taxes, that the capital side of the equation, which you're talking millions upon millions of dollars, always got short shift, right? Because you were focused on the operating budget. It's like, oh my God, there's $6 million for this building, this $5 million. So what we had done at that time was break it apart and say, let's do the capital planning side. That's how the capital planning workshop came about in September. That's how the vote on the capital plan in January, right? And what that allowed for was two things. Number one, a focus on that. And number two, it allowed us to say, and John will remember this from serving on the Board of Finance, no, we're not going to approve that on the capital plan. Put it into the operating budget, right? And it allowed for that decision to be made before the operating budget was presented for that year. It seemed to work relatively well. Now, this idea of doing it together at the same time and having the division heads make that presentation, that could work too. Okay, it's just different, and I think you want to allow that flexibility. Where I got concerned when I read the language here was in a provision, they said, prepare and maintain a long-term financial and capital plan that takes into account the next 5 years. And this is where I said, that's an error, okay? Because a financial plan implies an operating plan, where a capital plan implies a capital plan. And you don't want your selectmen. Now, if we were a business, I would say, hey, a 5-year finance plan, I love that, right? In a politically charged environment with everything else that this lady and the teams have to deal with, right? A 5-year financial plan, you don't want to put that in the charter, in my opinion. Okay, you want to put the 5-year capital plan. And that's, so when we started talking about this, that's where I came from. You want to separate the capital plan from the finance plan. You want the capital plan to be over that 5-year period. You want the finance plan to be the operating plan. and you want to allow her and her team, or the first select person, whoever it is, and their team, the flexibility to say, when do they want to present the capital plan? Working with the Board of Finance and
Right.
whomever, right? Because it could work really well, or you could be like, oh my God, we can't do
Right,
this the
right.
same way again.
Right, right,
You
right.
know, you know,
There should be flexibility. You're right.
yeah. And so that's what we were trying to get to here. I don't know if the attorneys have anything, or Nancy or Brenda have anything to add.
No, I agree with, I think there should be flexibility. I mean, there's a potential that we could have something ready by January. But again, right, we're doing this workshop format, which is it's a little different. And it's, we could potentially be ready by January, or we could do it during the process.
Right.
But again, the 5-year plan shouldn't be, 5-year capital plan shouldn't be in the charter. We just should have it, because Jared said the associations, all the CFO groups, they all go on their group blogs and talk, and he said, we need to have one, just to
Yeah.
be complying, I guess, with certain rules and regs. So that's why we should have it.
Yeah. It's also GFOA best practice, and I would talk, I mentioned this the other day, to your FA. I have no problem how, if you want to segregate it out, you can segregate it out, but does your capital plan need to coincide, your capital year plan, with the fiscal year? Now, you could adopt it in January to be effective in July, according to the selectmen's comments.
Yeah, I would say you just say you have to do it every
Have
year. You just have to do it every year. Leave how and when it gets done. Oh, just say you need to do a 5-year capital plan.
And just because you have a 5-year capital plan doesn't necessarily everything on that plan is going to be approved.
You're
Correct.
1,000%
And that's why it
correct.
shouldn't be voted on, because then people get the impression, because our town has never done that those items are actually
It's kind
happening.
of like the waterfall chart.
It's exactly the waterfall chart.
Right, but
This
what
is
about the
5
one-year
years.
capital plan, or 1 year?
That's the one that we had elected years ago to bifurcate and to vote on before the operating budget.
Right, but again, we don't want to, to your point, we
We've-
don't want to stick it and say it has to be done this date or that date.
Correct.
But it has to be done.
Correct. Because you need to vote on those
1 year.
items. Correct. You're right.
So, all right, Attorney Medic, you hear what everybody said. Write it up
Does that
that
make
way.
sense to everybody?
Does it? Yeah.
Yes, it does. No, it really does.
We'll get clarity tomorrow. I get
Someone
it.
needs to write it, but.
I know where you want to go. So, yeah, we're going to need to, under this theory, we're going to need to take the 1-year approval out of the budget process. And,
Well, leave it, I would leave the flexibility, Steve, to Tom's point. So if we want to do it in the fall or January, we do it, or if we want to do it during, but we just have to do it
I agree.
at some
yeah,
point.
and I get that, but we need to have at least the defined terms about it goes to the Board of Finance and is ultimately approved by
Well,
the
definitely.
RTM.
Definitely. Well, it goes Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, RTM.
It would ultimately have to be approved by the legislative body.
It doesn't get
Capital.
approved.
It's probably potential multi-year funding.
It doesn't get approved.
Move on, we'll get clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's move on.
We'll get clarification, and it's also subject to referendum, so
If we fund
it's got to go through the same process.
Steve,
Just like we always do, John.
Steve, it doesn't get voted on.
Steve, let's get clarification, we'll move on.
I like that.
All right.
Moving on.
I like that, moving on.
I think you have unanimous support.
There you go. 14, consider adding the word willing or similar qualifier prior to the word select persons.
This was
Nancy's.
Selectwoman Lefkowitz.
I don't have too much to add other than what I shared during both
Yeah.
the meeting with Attorney Baldwin and at the Board of Selectmen table. It just allows the select person appointed to serve for, and the example used was the WPCA, so that there is a willing there's a willing entered into the relationship when the first select person can appoint, and then the select person can agree or not agree and not feel as if they're violating a mandate from the charter. That's all. It's not a sword I die on. It just gives some not accountability, some agency over the participant.
Right, I would wonder though, I don't know where this came from originally, why we have this. I guess there is certain, for example, I'll give an example. The WPCA, without the administration's knowledge, was going to raise some certain rates or so on and so forth. Maybe it's in there because there's supposed to be some coordination from a member of the Board of Selectmen to keep it, either the administration or the public informed of these things. I don't know where this came from. I don't know why the first select person is on the pension board or the chairman of the police and fire board. I have no idea. Judy, do you know? Did you write it? Did you put it in some charter a long time ago? I don't know. But what if, so to Nancy's point, if the first select person says, because the charter says you have to be on it, and both Board of Select people say, I don't want to be on it, then what happens then? We're violating the charter? Is there a runner-up? Do you have to go to some other board and get somebody? I don't know how this is supposed to work. Does it throw a monkey wrench into our charter? I don't know.
I suspect initially, when this was formed, that there was a lot of discussion about what to do about our sewage system. And it was probably an informational reason.
But why do we have a Board of Select person on all of these things? What is the reason? Does anyone know why?
It's oversight. It's oversight. It's oversight.
It's a good thing, actually.
Yeah, but what if the person says they don't want to be on it? Then what happens?
Pam has a question.
Okay, so really what I think is happening here is, Selectwoman Lefkowitz, is it more than just the WPCA that you or some other person may not want to serve on?
I only brought it up because I was appointed to serve on it, and I'm happy to do so. But what if I weren't? It just brought up.
Okay, so here's the, so what the statement in the charter is, and to use WPCA as an example, is that a Board of Selectmen member should be on that board. So it's of importance to have that oversight. If somebody from the Board of Selectmen wants to refuse to serve on it, yeah, I mean, the directive there was to provide oversight. So if we say willing to serve, we're saying we don't need the oversight. So are we trying to correct that we should no longer have somebody on the WPCA from the Board of Selectmen?
Maybe.
Is
Well,
that,
maybe it
is
needs
that
to
the
be-
issue? Because when you get elected to that board, and then there are qualifiers in the charter, there's an obligation to fulfill those, whether you like your committee assignment or not. So is the
And I-
real,
and I-
is the real issue?
Yeah, yeah.
Is the real issue that not, that we should no longer have that as a qualifier?
No, I mean, I think you raise a great point. I mean, the fact is the oversight is important, so I wonder then if it needs to be clear that that's part of, and again, maybe this is one of those things that it has a further reaching implication because of the oversight piece, but then does it need to be codified elsewhere that this is part of the job?
It is part of the job because it's in the charter.
Yeah, so I mean, then that's, if that's the answer, that's the answer. I just brought it up as something to think about because of this discussion. I mean, it makes sense, but what happens again if they don't? Is it that we're not then?
You're not providing the oversight that was asked for in the charter.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the answer.
Okay, thank you.
I do think the oversight's important.
Okay.
All right.
Is it possible fix the discussion about administrative assistants? Would there be another individual in the administration or in the town that would be able to serve that role, or? Because it just seems to have administrative assistants, which might, when this was written, have a whole different understanding as to what that position might be. So, I mean, might you delegate it to the town administrator or someone like that?
Right.
If under the charter, would have to be, that is permitted as long as it's authorized by the RTM.
And then in that case, I don't have a problem putting in the willing as long as that oversight is there. I just think that having agency, if there is agency and there's an opportunity for it, it would be important. If it can't be because nobody else can step in, so again, something to think about. Yeah, that's my feeling. That's my, I don't need to debate it here. I just wanted to raise that as a point, as something to think about.
Okay. Well, I think we have enough in terms of questions, unless I misread that. But moving on to number 15, please review the mediation and resolution clause in order to achieve clarity of purpose, including consideration of deleting the word resolution.
Yeah, and I think this was mostly driven by me.
Okay.
And this was, the whole concept was that when you say resolution, it's like two kids are fighting and mom and dad are going to come in and they're going to, make the decision as opposed to they're going to mediate. I think it's the role of the first select person to mediate when town bodies are having a dispute. But at the end of the day, be it elected officials and that they have the responsibility to resolve their issues. So the first select person should be expected to mediate it, but not necessarily, I'm going to resolve it and tell you what the answer is to the other town bodies. And that's really where that came from.
I remember that conversation. John?
I just, and maybe I missed this. This is, there's been alternate language, hasn't been drafted. Did we get that language?
It was just to get rid of the word resolution.
That's it. That's all that's going on there.
That's,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks.
Well, that was one of the considerations. I was going to recommend one of two things, since I recommended this language to you, and I rue the day that I did so based on the storm that is erupted by this language. It was never intended to be anything more than a chief executive official already has in terms of authority.
Steve, take the win, man. Take the win. Lose the word resolution.
Members of the government. We have cooperation clauses in the charter. You have subpoena authority, frankly. Board of Selectmen has subpoena authority. And so this was never meant to be an uber power for the chief executive.
Okay,
And
Steve,
so I was going to recommend
Steve, I think we're,
mediate and resolution out and talk in terms of conciliation or
I think
the
we're-
alternative.
I think we're good.
Steve,
Yeah.
Steve, I think we're good, just taking the word out and moving on to the next item.
We're gonna go to 16 now.
Oh, you're fine?
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you. When you see me
Sorry,
doing
guys.
this.
Go, Steve, we're dying here.
All I have to say is we'll see. We'll see if we're good.
We took that resolution and moved on.
16, Town Administrator, please consider A, delineation of duties, B, change of title to Chief Administrative Officer, and C, codify reporting obligation to the Board of Select Persons.
So I'll
Thank you.
yeah, I'll touch on this. So number one, I know, because I did look at your meetings, I know you guys had a lot of discussion over whether to really scope out the responsibilities here. And I knew that really depends on who that person is. In this particular instance, if we were looking at today, we have an attorney there. So it's beautiful that he can work with FEMA and do some of the things he's doing. You might not have that in the next position, so the delineation of duties might change. That being said, I think there needs to be some broad commentary here about what is this person, are they going to have potential oversight responsibilities over departments, not laying out which department, but saying that, the first select person could ask the chief administrative officer to oversee some departments and fulfill other duties as defined by the first select person in that office, right? Something like that. That was the first thing. The second thing was it was a name change, just be consistent with the position really already exists in town government. I don't remember who brought that up, but it was a name change to be consistent with how we refer to the position today. And I think it's actually one of the attorneys might have said it's also consistent with the way they've seen it in other towns, right? And then the third item was report out to some type of reporting requirement to the Board of Selectmen. Now, you recall there's been a lot of consternation over should this person be appointed by the Board of Select people or appointed by the first select person. I came down, I'll talk to myself personally, I know how Brenda came down. I came down on the fact that it should be appointed by the first select person because that person needs to have, they need to be the right-hand person of the first select person, and they need that. That being said, I think it's a significant enough position within the town government, and given the fact that they could exert power over multiple departments, as well as large projects such as the fill pile, which is currently going on, that there should be a report out to the Board of Selectmen, whether that be on request or whether it be, on a certain time frame on whatever projects they're working on, just to keep the Board of Selectmen in the loop as to what's happening, right? I know that's kind of implied by the fact that the Board of Select persons can ask for that at any time they want, but really putting it in the charter as part of this position kind of elevates the position a little bit, as well it kind of points out the fact that that's the expectation. And that was the reason behind all three of those items. I hope that helps, and I'll defer to my colleagues if they have anything to add.
Thank you. I think that was helpful. I think I do remember hearing that when you discussed it. I like those. I know I shouldn't be. Okay. Any other questions?
Well, just to comment, for me, I made it clear that I did not think this should be codified in the charter. I do agree there has to be a reporting structure. Recognizing that I'm likely in the minority position here, I would also advocate for this to be Board of Selectmen approval, not just First Selectmen, because I would push back and say it is going to be the First Select person that hires this person, and so in some ways he or she would be getting to have say on who that right hand is, but adding that layer of having the Board of Selectmen review and weigh in on it just takes some of the politicization out of it a little bit. So I just wanted to echo that I do believe there needs to be some sort of reporting structure. I do wish that the job description would be more specific, and I would say town administrator would likely be the right title, but again, recognizing I may be in the minority position here.
I think we already actually voted on that.
Okay. Okay.
Well, good.
But, Mr. Chairman, can you just make that clear for the record, since the public's gonna be speaking, that question is not before us. The reporting to the appointment by the first select woman, or the first select person.
It's not in the resolution.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just do a follow-up on that real quick?
Yeah, please.
Tom, just when you say delineation of duties, are you saying, because I've seen language from a lot of other towns that I think is very good, actually, but it does give any first select person the authority and to designate other duties as the first select person may deem necessary.
So-
Is that what you want?
So, John, when I said what I said, right, about having some duties listed, I was actually trying to be deferential to your board in the understanding that you guys had discussed this and wrestled with this, and I saw that. So I didn't want to get into the weeds and say, no, you should do this after you guys already kind of litigated that amongst yourselves. What I did say was there needed to be something said, right? And you can make it broad enough to allow for what you're trying to get to. But if you're going to put the position in the charter, I felt it was important to say what's your expectation of the position, even at a pretty high level. And that, so would I be opposed to what you're saying? No, but you guys already went through a lot of that and came down with one opinion, okay? So that's where I was trying to go with it. Sure.
All right, number 17, please review whether there is a difference between a master plan and POCD.
Go ahead, turn it on.
This is an easy one. I met with Jim Wendt, the planning director, and he confirmed that this is archaic language, and all we should do is keep the first phrase and delete or amend any master plan previously adopted, because that was just a conflation of old and new language. And all that you need is that first phrase: prepare, adopt, amend the plan of conservation and development of the town, period.
Thank you. 18, please review whether the elector requirement should attach to the position of town attorney. That's in Article A. Do we have questions about this?
I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. All right, 19, please continue to review additional requests from the Board of Library Trustees and CFO. We have that.
We have that
Yeah.
today.
So there's no questions, I don't think.
sent you a bunch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that?
I had a lot to send us over the last.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very.
Number 20, please consider moving the cooperation provision to Article 1.
91A.
Yeah, that's in 91A, sorry.
Yeah, I had a question about that, just because it did seem to be specific to budgetary matters. I think that's why it was here.
Which one is that? That's right.
91A.
I don't have that in front of me, Jim. Can you give me that one?
I'm borrowing yours.
Oh,
You want
okay.
it back?
No, go ahead. But I'm like, what did I do?
I don't know why I can't find the document on my computer.
I can't find it either.
Okay, and the commentary here was to just move it,
Send it to you. We're talking more.
to just talk about cooperation.
Yeah, there was, I mean, I think the thought was that up front, we're talking about generic things that apply to everything, and people saw this as cooperation, maybe that should be there. When I went back and looked at it, that's what I was thinking. This one particular was about putting the budget together, and that's why I thought it'd be here, but I didn't know if somebody had some other.
You know, I personally, I'll speak for myself, I didn't focus on this one that much. However, I will say that I think it's important and might be important enough for you to move that whole thought of cooperation between the town bodies to more broadly define it than just the budget process, but to say there's an expectation of cooperation between all the town bodies.
There is a clause.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought
It's
so.
being restated here, but in particular respect to the budget process.
It doesn't, is it harmful? No. Is it redundant? It's redundant. I mean, I thought I read it earlier.
There's a provision in 6.8 called required cooperation. It's in the board and commission section. That would be the more relevant one to put into section 1, article 1, if you wanted to. It's a new provision to the point that that Selectman Flynn was making, is that everybody should cooperate.
Right.
So if I were to make a suggestion, I would move 6.8 there, which I think can be done. It's a new section, and it is consistent with the intent of item number 20.
It's not a hill I'm willing to die. You know, whatever you guys want to do, I think the idea of having it stated in the charter is fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
21,
Yeah, so this was actually me again in this one. I think, let's take the first part first. I think we had a discussion about the timeline of capital planning, right? And leave that vague into the discretion of the administration and the town bodies based on what's going on in the town in that time. I think that's probably the appropriate amount of flexibility. You know, say they need to do capital planning, say they need to do a 5-year capital plan, but leave it to the bodies to work together to decide what that timeline should be on the capital plan. Now, on the budget side, first of all, I want to commend you for all the work you all did on the budget process. It's an arduous process, and let me say that from my experience in it, I don't believe there's any right or wrong answer. There's just opinion. And I like the fact that it's still, I think it's important to put a default mechanism, which is what you guys put into this is how this is going to work, but then allowing, and I think you have to allow for the separation of powers for the town bodies to go and do what they need to do. I had two comments on, as it relates to the timeline, that my colleagues agreed to at least ask you guys to overhear. The first comment I'll make was, I thought it was very important so that you don't get the political ramifications or thoughts that you're trying to cram this process down and hurt the timeline that the various town bodies have to review the document, right? That you make sure that you allow for the same number of weeks that presently exists. That way, if a town body decides, and this has happened in the past, that they need additional meetings, they need additional flexibility, they need to understand things a little different, something happened. I can tell you, we had the Phil Pyle, we had Madoff, we had the big crash in 2008. In the course of the last 15 years or so, this has happened. So allowing the flexibility and making sure that the town bodies have enough time within that budget process to get all their meetings and all their questions answered, I think that's paramount. Okay, the structure of it, they can decide as they go through it and do it based on how the, what's going on in that course of that budget cycle, right? You'll recall, we were on the Board of Selectmen, you were on the RTM, you were on the Board of Finance when all hell broke loose a couple of years ago, and the process took a lot of time with COVID between the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the RTM. If you cram down the time too much and don't allow that, we end up not getting the best result. That was my first point. And that's why I said make sure, I would feel comfortable if you just make sure there's the number of weeks. And then the way you guys laid it out, I want to particularly give you kudos for that first meeting saying bring all the three bodies together and have the first select person present to those three bodies. I think that's a really good idea to kick the budget process off in that way. The second item, and people will kill me for this, one department head in particular, anything you can do to back up the budget process and do it later where there's better available information, I think all the town bodies benefit from that. And that's been, I guess, the gating item on that, and I have not had that specific conversation, has been with the assessor and the ability to get the tax bills out on a timely basis. I find it hard to believe that it's going to be very, very difficult to do that in 2022 and moving forward on a more timely basis. But you'll recall, or you may, some of you know, some of you may not, the biggest frustration in the budget process are two things in terms of timing. The state budget, which we're taking a guess at because they don't approve their budget till after they approve us, and that impacts us. And the second thing is the experience with medical insurance. And what that's going to do to the rates that go in. The more time you can allow even to get those two bits of information, the more accurate a budget you're going to have at the end of the process. So that came from me. My colleagues supported that enough to at least say it was worthy of further consideration by your body. But I thank you for hearing me out, and then I'll turn it over to, Nancy or Brenda.
So I would say that I think Commissioner Icona spoke to Mr. Flynn offline, talking about timeline and stuff. And I think what we talked about pretty extensively at the Board of Selectmen meeting, that essentially this new collaborative budget process was only going to be a week less than we normally all had. And we always still, all boards always maintain their independence. They could do whatever they want after the joint budget meetings were held. So I think you discussed adding a week ahead. So I think the language originally read, Chairman Caffarelli, that it said something to the effect no later than the second week of March. So just change it to no later than the first week of March. Right. And then you have the same exact time that we had always, but hopefully this collaborative process is going to be beneficial to all bodies involved and the public, who can then see all the presentations at once and hear the questions. I think it's going to be really great. I think people are going to like it. The people who serve on our boards, and I think the public too. So that's really it. That's the simplest change, I think, to what you originally had. Did I say that right? Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
Okay.
Any questions for that item? Number 22 is reevaluate the role of the first selectman as convener of the joint budget meetings in Article 9.3B. Yeah, Ms. Selectman Flynn.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, right, I think out of due respect for the office of First Select Person, the ability to convene the meeting, call it to order, Pledge of Allegiance, I think just to, maybe it's define what convene means. I think what would be a mistake is to have the First Select Person then manage and run the meeting. I think that, because in essence, at that point, they're presenting the budget to that joint body. And I don't think you want to put anybody in the position of trying to present and manage. It's not a good look. It's not efficient. You know, I think what you want is to turn it over, as we've done historically, to the chairperson of the Board of Finance, and let them deal with the mechanics of running the meeting, and let the First Select Person be a participant in presenting, in orchestrating, essentially, the presentations of the department heads. So I think it all comes down to, what do you mean by convene? That's my own opinion.
John?
So, and I appreciate what you just said, because I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
So I see it more in line of what we used to do in the past.
That's right.
Joint Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen meetings, but the First Select Person convenes the meeting, respect to her, respect to the office, but the meeting is actually facilitated and run by the chair of the Board of Finance.
That's right.
That's it.
That's right.
Okay.
That's the way I think that's a personal.
No, I agree, and because I think the issue is, and this is all, it doesn't look right when a First Select Person is running a meeting on his or her budget that's being considered by the Board of Finance and so on and so forth. That's it, and it's different.
well,
It's different when you're running your own Board of Selectmen meeting, but this is different.
I mean, John, you well know, right? I mean, because when we did it, right, there's times when the chairperson has to cut somebody off from a line of questioning, or it gets uncomfortable. You can't do that when it's in your own budget.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
How does that work out?
When I'm presenting at the Board of Selectmen.
I just want to make it clear that there is specific language in here that already addresses that it's convened by, and then,
Yeah, it's
and
all
then
been said.
subsequent meetings are chaired by.
The language is facilitated by the chair of the Board of Finance. I don't know what that means, facilitated.
Oh, okay, I got it. So you want to
Yeah, we need to clarify.
clarify that aspect.
What if you say presided over by?
Fine, something
Okay,
like that.
all right, I think that's
Runs the meeting, presides over the meeting, perfect.
Words have meaning, sure.
They
Yeah.
do. Facilitated, I looked it up in Webster's, and it doesn't, I did it a long time ago, just
Problem
to
is,
try
the
to
problem is
understand
with the
it.
word
Yeah.
facilitator, I got it.
right.
Okay, that's easy.
Oh, well, something like that, right. Thank you.
Thank you.
23. Please continue to review, who wrote this? And approve all errata, Scrivener's corrections, including but not limited to the effect, Article 3.2A, 1D, and E, restored language for final approval by the Board of Select Persons, and the effective date provisions, Article 10.5, in order to facilitate the implementation of any revisions. That sounds like it was a lawyer.
I think a lawyer wrote
Yeah.
that.
Steve?
Yeah, there's his hand.
That's all we need.
Go ahead, Mednick.
I have
Oh.
I just have a question for clarification, maybe something to look at where the Board of Ed is involved at the joint meetings. Is it I don't know if it's an error, but the way that it's the language in 9.3B2, I think. I just think it's something to look at in terms of the shall as opposed to, it could be, I'm looking, sorry. It's an errata, so I'll have to come back to it because I can't exactly see what my note is. So I think it would exist under errata, so I'll do that separately. It's the power that the Board of, under the, in 9.3B2, 9.3, I think, wait. 9.3B2. Oh, that the first selectman shall convene with the Board of, is the Board of Ed supposed to be included on this?
No,
No.
they're a
No.
department.
No, their budget's included, and they would be presenting before this tribunal, but they're not part of the tribunal.
Do we have clarification on that for your liking? All right, Steve, you want to talk about 23? Or you know what, actually, if we don't have any questions for select persons on this, we can talk to Steve about this tomorrow during our deliberations, because.
That's correct. These are ongoing.
Yeah, and so, and 24, I think, would be the same unless anyone has anything specific
Yes.
to say. A question to our Board of Select persons who are here.
But Selectman Lefkowitz, was your question answered? That's a,
I-
they're a
well-
department, they're a department. I asked,
Right,
that's a
it's an-
good question, because I asked it, because I confused myself.
Yeah, I think it's an I'm just trying to get clarification on the language. It's an investigation. It may be that I need to read this again, but I'm asking you just to take a look at it. It's not,
This is not an investigation. This is the budget deliberation process.
let me come back to you because I can't read my own note.
Yeah, we received, somebody else had actually filed something about budget language, somehow inferring that it was an investigation, and that's just not correct. We'll talk about that tomorrow night, though.
I got that same email, I believe, so I just wanted to make sure.
I figured we were reading from the same pages, yes.
Okay, so,
All right, thank you.
good. Then, anything from the select persons further? Hold on 1 second, let's just make sure we're on, I know.
Ryan, he's like getting this look of joy across his face.
I think the email was asking Attorney Mednick where it came from and why it's there. I think that's what the question that remains to be answered.
Do you know what she's talking about?
Well, I can give you a simple answer. The Board of Education is the department
this.
of the town. They have to submit a budget, and they have to present their budget like every other department. That's
It's
the
back
simple
to the
answer.
Board of Ed, where you were just.
That's the way most budget processes,
Yeah, no.
in fact, if not all budget processes work in the state.
They're like every other department.
Yeah, we're already there.
It's just a department like any other department.
They're our biggest one.
Okay, so we are going to skip item agenda 5 on the agenda if there's no objection, because we're not going to deliberate tonight unless anybody feels differently about that. Number 6, next steps. So tomorrow, we'll begin with the public hearing. It'll be just like we've done in the past, 3 minutes. It'll be limited to the resolution, and then we'll go into deliberations. My forecast may have been off about the Monday meeting, but I remain hopeful. So, yeah. Anything else before we adjourn? Motion.
I would just like to say,
I just
if I
wanted
may,
to say
Chairman
thank you.
Caparelli, I'm not going to be able to attend tomorrow because of my personal family situation, and I just I want to make that clear for the public, that it's not that I'm not interested in what they have to say to your committee. I just, unfortunately, have to be with my family.
And thank you for all your time tonight. This was very helpful, all of you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, Nancy, I just wanted to offer my condolences to you for your loss of your uncle. And I wanted to
Thank
just
you very much.
thank the commission for your work on this. I know it's been a long process, but I want to thank you very much for your time and attention.
All right, so I will then Did you have anything?
Yeah, I want to, first of all, condolences, Nancy, my best to your family, and sorry for your loss. And to the commission, thank you for a very productive night, and thank you for hearing us out and for the discussion and for all your efforts to date. Most appreciated.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Matola, Marlene seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion, we're adjourned.
What's the score, John?